couple minutes late from the tour of Valley Middle School. But let's go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and the flag is back there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first thing we need to do is administer the oath of office to our school board members, but before we do that, we have to get a motion and a second and an approval from the school board for them. So, and Alicia cannot be here tonight, but I need a motion and a second to approve our school board members for this term. Moved by second. Do we have a
second?
Second by Chris. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. And now we'll let, am I doing this? Oh, cool. I thought you were. Okay.
Is there any way that you can be louder? We could barely hear.
Okay, we'll try and make sure it's louder. So we'll try and talk. Is that better? Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Evan, you want to stand? And he just reads this right. Yep.
Just
You've already been sworn into that.
I, Evan Whalen, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of North Dakota, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of student representative to the School Board of Grand Forks Public School District Number 1 according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
Congratulations for a second year, Evan. Thank you. The agenda, we have approval of the agenda. We just need to move the Smart Restart update needs to be under recommendations for action. So if we could have an amendment to the agenda just to move Smart Restart to action item.
so move it to item A under recommendations for action.
And I'll second that.
Okay. Further questions or discussions about the agenda? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we have item 4, which is approval of the minutes from the July 26th meeting. Do we have any additions, corrections to the minute meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second? Second by Shannon. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Same sign. Motion carries. Now let's move on to citizen comments. I have a small card decked here of comments, so we will start with, yeah, we're gonna do it here. So we'll go ahead and start. And I'm sorry in advance if I mispronounce your name, because some of them I have trouble with. So the first one up is Emily Freilich. And if you could come to the mic, and then we may as well just turn the mic on and leave it on. So Scott can help you there.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, good evening. My name is Emily Freilich, and my husband and I have 4 children. And I've had the pleasure of living in Grand Forks since 1997, since the flood. So I'm here today as a concerned parent, a voter, and a tax-paying citizen. About a month ago, you were all talking about gaining financial trust from the people of Grand Forks. It was discussed that you needed to demonstrate that you were transparent and trustworthy with the amount of funds that you already have. Starting this fall, you have the opportunity to gain trust, not just financial, but physical, emotional, and moral trust. It's by listening to the people of Grand Forks that want to maintain the option, talking the option to refuse masking or vaccination in order to return to work or participate in school. Some of you have masks, some of you don't. Don't you feel that that is the right call, that you have the choice to do that? Mandating it for or against, that's taking the choice away from the people. These medical health decisions must remain with the parents to decide for their children. These kids are not yours, they're ours. If you want us to trust you in the future with financial desires, then stop your overreach into medical decisions that should be left with the families. Gain our trust by maintaining freedom to choose what is best for our family. Gain our trust by taking citizens' concerns seriously and by showing transparency of your thoughts on these issues. Trust is a two-way street. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. And as we go along, as we go along, if what's been said is that you were going to say has already been said, you don't need to come up and repeat it necessarily. We trust everybody. And please keep it to 3 minutes, so thank you, Emily. The next one I have is Nikki Berg-Buren. Oh, it's going to take just a second. She's in the other room. Thank you, Nikki.
Hi there, thank you. I'm Nikki Berg-Buren. I have 2 children who are going to be entering middle school this year in Grand Forks. Neither of my kids have seen the inside of a classroom since March of last year when we were first sent home during the pandemic. Distance learning has been very challenging. Probably the most challenging part has been the social and emotional toll of being isolated from other kids, from their teachers. So my children are thrilled at the prospect of going back to school this fall, to see their teachers, to see their friends, and I'm thrilled for them. The problem is my youngest child is too young to be vaccinated. So short of keeping her home for another year, I have to put my trust in you to create an environment in which she is safe to go to school, in which her well-being can be protected from the incredibly transmissible Delta variant of the COVID virus. Universal masking in schools is the best way to do that. I suspect that all of you are here in your role because you are passionate about education. And all of you know that one core piece of curriculum in the Grand Forks Public Schools, something our children are taught from kindergarten every year up until they graduate, is science. Not pseudoscience that is informed by fear or disinformation or even outright lies, but actual science, informed by research, experimentation, verifiable data. I don't understand why a school board would even consider disregarding science, ignoring science, something that is such a core piece of our own curriculum in this district. The nation's top scientists and public health experts have made it very clear, including our own public health experts here in Grand Forks. Vaccination and universal masking in schools is essential to protect students and staff from COVID and especially from the Delta variant. There is no question about this. This is scientific fact. To ignore this science is reckless and dangerous. To acknowledge it and do nothing about it is equally reckless and dangerous. And that's what you would be doing with just a mask recommendation without a requirement. If you're considering recommending but not requiring masking in school, I would ask you to consider, why are you making that recommendation in the first place? Is it because you hope that students and staff will mask because we know that science says that's the best way to protect them? If so, then why not actually protect them by requiring it in the schools? A recommendation has no teeth. A requirement will save lives. If you support a mask recommendation, but not a requirement because you don't want to dictate what students wear, well, that ship has sailed. You already dictate certain body parts that have to be covered, body parts that have absolutely no health risk for anybody. So I would ask that you please be as concerned about our children's exposed lungs as you are about their exposed thighs. Please make your decision based on science. Please protect our children, especially those who are most vulnerable, those who have no option of vaccination right now. Please listen to science. Please trust the science. Please require a mask mandate in our schools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nikki. Next, I have Debbie Todhunter.
Good evening, school board. My name is Debbie Todhunter, and my husband Paul and I have lived in the community since 1989. We have 4 grown children who were educated and graduated from the Grand Forks Public Schools. I would encourage the board to become familiar with the studies that point to the unhealthy effects on children who are forced to wear masks for extended periods of time. Increased levels of CO2, inability to read the faces of teachers and peers, and hiding one half of their face behind a mask only produce negative effects on their physical and mental health. I can appreciate the feelings of speakers that encourage the wearing of masks. I can appreciate that, but I can more appreciate that the option is there to wear or not to wear. If one feels that a mask protects against viruses, then one should have the option to wear it. If one does not feel that that is effective, then one should have the option of not wearing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I have, next is Angela Erlacher.
Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank you all for the work that you are doing. Your dedication to this community is really greatly appreciated. My name is Angela Erlacher. I'm a mom to 3 kids, one of whom is going to Phoenix, one's going to Schrader, and one just graduated from Central High School. And I'm here today to urge you to mandate masks for all students and staff in our schools when the transmission levels suggest that we should be doing that. I know that there's a contingent of community members who are demanding that the decision to mask be left to the individual. But that focus on the individual ignores the absolute necessity of taking a collective approach to combating this virus that has already killed well over 4 million people across the globe. Allowing some students and staff to come into the schools unmasked is inevitably going to lead to more infections, and this will lead to more deaths. Masks, of course, are not 100% effective, but they are proven to slow the spread. It's quite a heavy responsibility that you have before you. Your decisions for our schools will affect how many more people are sickened and killed. People's lives and health are in your hands. Imagine yourself next summer, after the Delta variant and future variants have sickened and killed people in our community. If you only recommend but not mandate masks, will you feel like you did enough in your position of leadership to protect our community? Or will the deaths and sickness weigh on your conscience, knowing that you could have done more? So I do urge you to take the necessary collective approach to this problem and mandate masks in our school when the COVID cases are deemed necessary to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Next, I have Adrian Saltini. Adrian Saltini. Thanks, Bill. That sounds good. So, that sounds good. After Adrian speaks, Pam Galloway is up to bat next. So, go ahead, Adrian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adrienne Salentini, and I'm a parent of a third grader at Kelly Elementary. I want to keep kids in school and without closures for quarantine. My major concern is with the statement in the Smart Restart program about the optional mask wearing in the fall. First, I'll address the word optional. If you want to know what this means in practice, visit any store in Grand Forks with a similar policy, and you'll see that a very low percentage of adults or kids are choosing to wear a mask even where they are strongly recommended to do so. The concept that my mask protects you and your mask protects me is always stressed by scientific and medical authorities. As such, my masked child is not significantly protected from COVID-19 by her own mask. She's protected by the masks of others. Therefore, optional mask use is not effective in protecting our kids unless they all do it. My other concern is with the distinction of vaccinated versus not. As you know, children under 12 are not vaccinated because they don't have the option to be vaccinated yet. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends universal masking because a significant portion of the student population is not yet eligible for vaccines, and masking is proven to reduce transmission of the virus. The CDC specifically recommends masks for children aged 2 and older while indoors. Our current spread in Grand Forks and Polk counties is low, but it's starting to rise, including instances of the Delta variant. And the Delta variant carries a viral load 1,000 times higher than the COVID-19 strain we experienced last year. The CDC says it's almost as contagious as chickenpox, which ironically means very little to most younger families because of vaccinations. It is true that around 90% of kids who get the initial strain of COVID-19 were fine or they have mild symptoms. It's rare for kids to die from COVID-19, but there's also scary complications for children with asthma or other health issues, and that was just for the initial strain. The Delta variant introduces a lot of unknowns. Around 5% of children who contacted that initial strain of COVID-19 have been seriously ill for weeks or in the hospital. This sounds like a small number, but it's roughly 5 out of every 100 children that get infected. And again, those aren't even the numbers for the Delta variant. Across the country, the news is reporting hospitalizations of many previously healthy children, and school hasn't even started in most places. In summary, please require masks, at least until vaccines are approved and widely available for elementary kids, and then we'll be able to make our choices. People who study infectious diseases and pediatrics recommend it. Please don't make a decision that puts all of our elementary-aged children at a dangerous health risk. Let's keep our kids healthy and in the schools this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Next up is Pam Galloway, and after that is Philip Irwin.
I'll yield because it's been said what I was going to say.
Are you Pam?
Yes.
Okay, so Philip Irwin is next, and then Nathan Schleith.
Hi, my name is Phil Irwin. I'm a Grand Forks resident. I have 5 children, and they're really loud and exciting. I want to talk today about parental rights as it relates to personal medical decisions. There's been a lot of talk today in relation to these things, and I have an excerpt I want to read. I'm asking specifically for the school board to allow parents and their children to make informed health decisions for themselves and for their family, and with their doctor. By requiring masking and not making it an option, it really undermines what my responsibility as a parent of 5 children is. And that's to make the best health decisions absolutely possible for my child. I know them intimately, absolutely intimately. And unfortunately, you all do not. Often even the doctors do not. And so it is my job to make those decisions, and it is not your job to take them away from myself as a parent. Here's an excerpt from the North Dakota State Declaration of Rights. This is your state of North Dakota. All individuals are by nature equally free and independent, and they have certain inalienable rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending their life, their liberty, acquiring possessing, protecting property, their reputation, pursuing and obtaining safety. I'm going to stop there. Pursuing and obtaining safety. Does the school board have the right to tell my child not to walk across the street? We make those sorts of decisions every single day as individuals. It is not your job to make those decisions for me. Please adhere to North Dakota's own Declaration of Rights to ensure that parents are now equally free to make the healthcare decisions for their children. The school's job is to respect the medical decisions and not to mandate them. We also need to be realistic about what's actually happening here. Others have mentioned it. We're going to be getting into vaccination, correct? So if you set the precedent where now you're able to make those health decisions for myself and for my children, what's to stop you from making the next one? And the next one? And the next one? It's not okay. So if the science is indeed correct, as has been stated tonight, then we shouldn't have to put something on our face. We shouldn't have to put something experimental into our body. We should be able to make the decision that's going to keep our children safe, and we accept that risk. We accept that risk every day, and I will accept it for the rest of my life and for my children's life. It's a risk that's worth taking so we can take care of these kids, we can educate them in a way where they can learn. They can actually learn, and they can understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Nathan, you're up next. Nathan, you're up now. And then after Nathan is Eric Christofferson.
Good evening. My name is Nate Schleif, and I have two sons. One is a senior this year at Red River, and my son Austin is going to be a freshman at Central. I come tonight and speaking on behalf of my son Austin. Austin has special needs, and one of the things that we've worked with a lot and have had great results with is communication. So he's primarily nonverbal, has a communication device that he uses, and also uses some sign language as well. What we noticed last year when we were wearing masks is when you do the research on it about when you're trying to communicate with somebody, 7% of it is verbal, 38% of it is nonverbal, and 55% of it is visual. So when you have a mask on and you can't see what this person is trying to express to you, it's extremely hard. If you notice, most of the folks that have come in here and spoke to us, even with a mask on, have taken their mask off so that you could understand what they were trying to say. So I think that's important to think about from a communication standpoint when our students are there to learn is how do we understand each other and take that information to the best of our ability when we have a mask on. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Eric Christofferson, and then Andre Curran is up after that.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen of the school board. I'm a busy dad, father of 3. I got 2 little ones, one in kindergarten, one gonna be in 2nd grade. Love them very, very much, as I'm sure there's very many parents here too. And I don't know if I want to get into too much back and forth, but I'm also a nurse at the hospital. Lived through some pretty stressful times last fall. Talked to a lot of very stressed out family members. I'm worried about our community for this fall. Seriously worried. Just on many, many accounts. But what I wanted you to do today is just follow out some of the things that the Department of Education has asked you to do. The CDC has asked us to do. Masks aren't medical equipment. Masks aren't medical devices. They're not something that is not a medical decision. It's just equipment. Just like when you're playing a sport, just like when you're driving on the road, it's like a seatbelt. Just protects you. It's just equipment. That's all. And kids are really good about following rules if everybody works together. At least if we all have encouragement, we can encourage our kids to protect each other, show each other that we care about each other. And we're just a small community in Grand Forks. We're not, we just care about each other. So I'd like you to think about that, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Andre Kern, and then Lauren Smith is after Andre.
Good evening, school board. And my name is Andre Kane. I have a first grader at Phoenix Elementary starting in the fall. First of all, I want to thank you guys for the tremendous job you guys did last year. I could not have imagined the decisions you had to make. And we went through it pretty uneventful. Kids skate in school. And honestly, I wish we can do the same this year. I don't have time to be in and out of quarantine because if somebody gets sick, we will have to quarantine. I mean, I think that's pretty clear if we want to keep the health and safety of the kids at heart. So I'm just asking you guys to follow CDC guidelines, Department of Education, to please require masks in schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Next is Lauren Smith, and then after her will be Mark Peterson.
I'm going to yield. Thank you.
Yield your time, thank you. Mark Peterson. And then after Mark is Kimberly Hagan.
Hi, Mark Peterson, taxpayer and constitutionalist. Just have a few quick points I want to rip through here. All right, so when you factor in the undoubtedly uncounted millions of unreported asymptomatic cases, the survival rate of COVID-19 is 99.9%. What does that tell you? 2, children are the least vulnerable to COVID, having virtually no difficulty with it. Virtually, I said. They should be the last group to even think about wearing masks or mandating masks for kids. Okay, 3, average age of C19 death is 80, 2 years older than life expectancy. That tells us a lot more, doesn't it? 4, vaccine doesn't stop someone from getting or spreading it, especially the Delta variant, which has been shown that this vaccine doesn't do anything for. Same with masks, where it was estimated 75 to 80% of people who got COVID-19 said they wore masks routinely or almost all the time. That was a study from last fall in the middle of the mask mania, in case any of you didn't know that. All right, 6, viral particles are too small for the majority of masks in use, so it's useless to even keep up the charade. 7, we got even Anthony Fauci has flip-flopped on masks and was seen not wearing his mask at a ball game when he was telling others to do so. He also said earlier last year that people don't need to be walking around wearing masks, if anyone ever remembers that. Okay? This guy is a fraud. He's been proven to be a fraud. He's been lying to Congress this whole time. So I would encourage all of you to get on YouTube and look up these videos of him saying different things to Congress that have been proven untrue. And he's just been outright lying to people. So if you're putting your hope and confidence in this guy, you guys are really misled. Next one, furthermore, why would anyone who calls himself an American want to make other Americans get an injection of a foreign substance with proven severe reactions in some people and some deaths against their will, just so they can be employed, etc.? I'm saying this right now because I know this is probably going to be a thing with the school systems, okay? I'd argue that's not very American of the person or persons attempting any kind of mandate against another American's will. That goes to the topic of liberty. God gave us life and liberty with an understanding that we'll have sickness and death to deal with, and we just have to do our best without infringing on other people's life and liberty. When people and government start ruling over others with edicts or mandates, we enter into territory our founders were trying to get away from. I'll close with a quote from Ben Franklin, founder. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserves neither liberty nor safety. No one should want another to give up their liberty for your perceived feeling of safety either. No masks.
Thank you, Mark. Kimberly Hagan is up next, and then Jason Look after Kimberly.
Good evening. My name is Kimberly Hagan. I am a mother of 2 boys in Grand Forks. One is in 5th grade, and the other one will be starting preschool this fall. As we all know, the last 18 months has been an unprecedented time, and I know that we all have some strong and even fiery opinions on the topics of COVID, masking, and vaccines. By speaking here tonight, I don't wish to spark heated conversation or force you to change your minds because, let's be honest, a lot of that has already been done. I wanted to share my support for the board to keep masks optional for our children and hopefully to keep the vaccine talk to a minimum. Studies have shown again and again that children are not victims or vectors of this virus, and deciding if they should or should not wear a mask should be left up to the parents. I know some will say that their child feels safer when wearing a mask, but unfortunately my son did not have that same experience this past year. As a mother, it was extremely hard to hear my son say things like, "Sometimes it's hard to breathe." Or, "When we're singing in choir or playing in gym, it's hard for me to catch my breath. I feel like I can't get enough air." These are the things that make me pause and say, are we really doing what's best for our children? I know there's been some concern also brought up by the board that there will be bullying for people who choose to wear masks, but I think that's our job as parents to speak to our kids and make sure that we use our words kindly and respectfully for those people who choose differently than we do. And that's really what it comes down to, being kind and respectful for those people who don't make the same medical choices as we do. One comment that was made at the last board meeting was that adults are not doing their part in getting vaccinated and possibly ruining it for our kids going forward. We can't put fault or blame on others and say one group of people is ruining it for our kids. I can assure you, us parents are not taking this lightly. We need to weigh the risks and benefits for our own families and children and take those potential consequences if they come. Because at the end of the day, we don't know what the 10 to 20 year outlook for asymptomatic COVID is, nor do we know what the 10 to 20 year outlook for this vaccine is. So either way, we are all taking some level of risk, and that alone should increase our grace, mercy, and empathy towards each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Jason, you're next, and then John Mesner is after Jason.
My name is Jason Look. I'm a father of 4. My wife and I have 4 children, ranging from 1st grade to 8th grade. But I want to talk about me as an educator. I've been in Grand Forks for 17 years. And I know there's a struggle between should kids wear masks, shouldn't they wear masks. It's not what I want to talk about, but I do want to talk about the kids that did wear masks last year. We had a great year. The kids were fine with it. We had weekly meetings, not just to talk about masks, but we have weekly meetings in general, just to talk about, some of the things that are happening in our classroom. And one of the things that comes up is, do you care? Is it a big deal? Do you not like it? Is it the worst thing in the world? And it wasn't. Did they like it? Some said not really, but they understood why we had to wear it. They didn't complain about it. They didn't take their masks off and say they weren't going to wear them. We just made it a thing. It wasn't a big deal. And I think that's what, as a group, if we could, it's just what we're going to do. Just to keep us safe, it's not a big deal, and we play it off that way, then the kids are fine with it, and it's not. As far as how did kids learn? I think all of my kids, their reading scores, their math scores, their science scores, everybody did very well. Again, having our classroom meetings, we played games. We talked about how we have a counselor, Mr. McNichols, who had come in and talked about how we communicate and, the way you say things, how you say them. It's not the words that come out of your mouth, but it's how you say them and your body language. And we talked a lot about that. And so we were able to use our body language, our voices, our eyes to convey how we felt and what we thought about. I just want you to know that it wasn't the worst thing in the world. The kids did an awesome job. They were great. And I don't want you to think that we take it lightly as educators and that we're not trying to, do the best for our students. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. John is up next, and then Travis Hendrickson after John. John Mesner.
Hello, everyone. Very excited. This is my first time speaking here at the school board meeting. Just want to say that my name is John Meisner, and I was born and raised here in Grand Forks, and a graduate of Central High School. And currently, me and my wife do not have any kids, but we plan on having kids in the future. And I just want to share some evidence that there's no really any solid ground that masking children in school is necessary. And this evidence I'm going to share comes from the CDC, Johns Hopkins University, the New England Journal of Medicine, and the U of M. Throughout this pandemic, children have neither been the chief vector of transmission, nor have they been seriously affected by the COVID-19 virus. People under the age of 18 represent about 75 million in the US population. And according to the CDC statistics, people under the age of 18 that have died from COVID or with COVID since the start of the pandemic number 340 out of 75 million. That puts it well below the flu, which in 2019 claimed 434 under the age of 18. So let's dive a little bit deeper into those deaths. Johns Hopkins University did a data analysis of those 340 kids that had passed with COVID, and they found that there was not a single child in that group that did not have some sort of pre-existing health condition, essentially saying that if a child is healthy, there's an almost a 0% chance of them dying from COVID. And even the kids that do have some other health condition, such as asthma or obesity or type 1 diabetes, still have an extremely low rate. Again, that's the 0.008%. What about hospitalizations? Even if they don't die, nobody wants to have their child go to the hospital. Well, there's good news on that front as well. People under the age of 18 that contracted COVID-19 were hospitalized at a rate of 8 out of 100,000, or 0.008%, which also puts it below influenza, which hospitalizes 195 per 100,000 in that same age demographic, again in 2019. But a person may say, well, they still could be asymptomatic, spreading it to their teachers, parents, grandparents, and so on. Well, then I have some good news on that front as well, because if an adult or elderly is afraid of contracting COVID, the CDC has a vaccine, that they claim is 93% effective at stopping serious illness and almost 100% effective at stopping death. So what about the Delta variant? Well, the New England Journal of Medicine claims that the 2 vaccine cycle has an 88% efficacy rate still against the Delta variant, which is very high considering that most flu vaccines hardly ever reach 50%. And even the few instances of breakthrough infections, the rate of serious illness is well below 1%. And that's according to the University of Minnesota Center for Infectious Disease Research. Now, I know I'm going a little over time, but I just have one quick thing I would like to talk about the graphic that Dr. Brenner shared on our state of transmission. And I think that is, no matter how high our transmission rates go, I do not believe that should be the chief determinant, when it comes to making policies about masking or vaccines in the future. Because I believe the most important data point when we're talking about those sort of policies are the rate of hospitalizations and the death rate, because it is not a public emergency when a whole bunch of people get a mild cold or a mild flu, which have very little hospitalization or death rate. And currently across the state, there are 17 people hospitalized with COVID and only 1 that is in the ICU. Here at All True, we have about 4. We're not overwhelmed. This is not a health emergency. And since the beginning of February, our 7-day rolling average for death has been 1 to 0. So despite our increased numbers of cases, we should not...
Please wrap it up, John.
Yes, of course. Sorry. We should not be afraid of the rising COVID numbers because they have had very little impact to no impact on hospitalizations or death. And with this information, I believe that we should continue to allow children and parents to make the decision based on masking and what they feel safe and necessary for their health. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Travis Hendrickson is up next, and then Lauren. And Lauren, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Pachatek or something like that, so sorry.
Hi, everyone. My name's Travis Hendrickson. I have 3 boys that are in high school here, and my daughter is starting kindergarten this year. They all hate wearing the masks, and it's a joke when they're playing sports that they're forced to do this. Let's not start this year off for my daughter starting her first year wrong. Here's something right here. This is supposed to save your life. This is supposed to save your life. Here's a clean pair of underwear. If I fart through this in my jeans, are you going to smell it? This is garbage. It does nothing. If me wearing a mask is to save you, then I want all of our teachers to start conceal and carrying, because it's to save everyone else. Anyone that thinks as soon as, just like everything started to get calm here, everybody was getting back to normal, a new variant came. If you don't think that's going to keep happening and happening every year until this is the new normal, wearing masks, that's not a life that we're going to live. You guys need to give, if people want to wear their masks, they feel comfortable, let them do it. My kids are not guinea pigs. They're never going to get that shot. They're not going to wear masks. I'd like to close with, remember what country you live in. You live in the United States, not Nazi Germany.
Thank you, Travis. Next up is Lauren. Is Lauren here? Yes. Sorry about your last name. And then after Lauren is Tim Prescott.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Pachotic. It's okay about the name. I'm here as a mother of 3. I've never been to a school board meeting before. I was a little nervous because I didn't have time to prepare and go through all the statistics and all the things I've heard over the past year and a half. But I came today to fight for my children. 2 are elementary age children and 1 is a preschool age. I have seen what has happened to them over the past year and a half with being out of school, in school, wearing masks. And I will say they put up with it. They didn't do a lot of complaining because this is what they were told to do by us, by parents, by their teachers. They do what they're told. And now it's our time, I think, to speak up and to finally say enough is enough. We know, as many people have pointed out, all the science, and there's science, of course, going both ways. I understand that. It depends on who you listen to, and but we know that children are not very vulnerable to the spread. They're not going to be hospitalized by this for the most part. We know that it is our right to choose as parents the best decisions for our children's health. So I just wanted to reiterate that today. I've spoken to dozens and dozens of parents that I know in the area. A lot of people feel the way that we feel, and I feel we are a small amount of people that have come to speak to you today, but I wanted you to know that there's a lot of people behind us. We've had over 550 people in the past week sign a petition saying, please unmask our children, and that was just through word of mouth going around town. So I felt like it was my duty to speak up today and say that the CDC doesn't speak for all of us, and please keep us in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Tim Prescott is next, and then after Tim is Christy Merkel.
My name is Tim Prescott. I'm here to speak in favor of mandating masks through all the public schools. The CDC has, the people working there have spent their lives studying these issues and learning and studying the data. And they say that our county has a substantial transmission of COVID. And they, along with the Grand Forks County Health, are recommending that we mask whenever we are indoors for our safety. Vaccinations are the best protection from COVID, but less than 10% of Grand Forks children have received a vaccination shot, and most, like my 2 daughters, aren't yet eligible. Until all children have had a chance to be fully vaccinated, the best protection we can offer our children is asking them to wear a mask and making sure that others who do not yet know they are infectious also wear a mask. My mask protects you, and my mask protects me. It protects all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Next is Christy Merkel, and after Christy is Brooke Van Looy.
Good evening. I'm sure you guys have all gotten my emailed all of you today
a short little snippet because I knew I didn't have a lot of time. It was a 6-minute video of a physician talking basically about what everybody else is saying, but it's coming from a physician. So I don't know if y'all want it, but the petition that they're talking about, right here it is. I started it. When I printed it out before I left, it had 576. Right now, I just checked it, it has 650. Here's all the comments, pages of people defending the petition. This is hearsay, but I heard through the grapevine that y'all have emailed teachers already and told them that there will be masks in school. I don't know if that's true or not. If it is, yeah, I'm gonna be really pissed off. What's the harm in the children wearing masks, right? We've been hearing that all the time. It's only a minor inconvenience. I heard that tonight too. Oh, if it saves just one life. When the pandemic began, the lack of knowledge about COVID-19 justified that type of thinking and that type of behavior. That excuse has vanished. It's become clear long ago that COVID is less dangerous to children than the flu. Speaking of the flu, 2009 to 2010, that's when the swine flu came out. It was 5 times deadlier to kids than COVID. But it didn't hit the boomers, so it didn't stoke an irrational fear, a pandemic that disrupted the lives of our children. Let that sink in for a minute. It killed 5 times as many, but there wasn't mandates for masks and lockdowns. April 2009 to April of 2010, that's only 12 months, 0 to 17-year-olds who contracted the swine flu passed away from the swine flu at a fatality rate of 0.0066. Now let's take COVID from February 20 to May of 21, 15 months. Those that have contracted and passed away from COVID left a 0.0012% fatality rate. The swine flu was 5 times worse to children. No masks, no lockdowns, no forced mandates. These non-surgical masks and cloth coverings that the kids are wearing every day, they have a success rate of 0.02%. Those homemade masks fail the fit tests within 30 seconds of wearing it. So after 30 seconds, your little mask, cloth one, is done. Studies are out there proving these points. To protect yourself from COVID, you have to be fitted with a sealed mask from a respiratory fit specialist. These sealed fitted masks go over your nose and under your chin. They are 98% effective if fitted properly by trained fit specialists. And they only last 2.5 hours, and then they need to be thrown away. There's a group of parents in Gainesville, Florida, who were concerned about the potential harms of masks. They submitted these masks to a lab for analysis after 24 hours. This is what they found on their masks: pneumonia-causing bacteria, meningitis-causing bacteria, dangerous antibiotic-resistant bacterial pathogens, pathogens that cause fever, ulcers, acne, yeast infections, strep throat, and more. On top of masks causing headaches, drowsiness, dizziness, reduced ability to concentrate, and the reduction in cognitive function. Adults, parents, are supposed to ease their children's fear, to reassure them that monsters aren't hiding underneath their bed. Instead, we're frightening them into believing that they're being stalked by some invisible menace lurking in the air. Here's the petition. Here's the comments. Good luck.
Thank you, Christy. Next up is Brooke Van Looy, and after Brooke is Suzanne Gonzalez-Smith. Thanks, Brooke.
Hello, my name is Brooke Van Looy, and I'm here tonight as both a teacher and a parent to speak about the need for universal masking this coming school year. As a teacher, I saw how hard we all worked last year to keep our schools healthy, safe, and open. We enforced mask wearing and physical distancing, we constantly sanitized and contact traced. It was a challenge at times, but our success made it worth the effort. Other than a few weeks between Thanksgiving and winter breaks, we had face-to-face learning. Now we're facing an outbreak of a COVID variant that is twice as contagious as what we faced last year. To only recommend masks for this coming school year ensures that mask wearing will be minimal. Why would we have fewer protections this year than we did last year? All that effort will have been wasted if we allow COVID to spread unchecked through our schools this year. I also believe we will be forced to move to remote learning much earlier and more often if masks aren't required. As we all know, remote learning was stressful for students, parents, families, and teachers. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the American Academy of Pediatrics both say that all students, teachers, staff, and visitors should wear masks, regardless of vaccination status. Unless you guys require it, that level of masking won't happen. Masks are especially crucial to protect our youngest learners who can't get vaccinated yet. My husband and I kept our 2 daughters home last year to protect them from COVID. We're sick about the idea of sending them back with fewer protections and greater risk this year. The bottom line is schools are expected to protect their students from all manner of harms, including shootings, tornadoes, fires. To fail to require masks during a pandemic would be to abdicate your responsibility to the children in your care. And it would create ripple effects in the Grand Forks community. I know there will be pushback, but I implore you to require universal masking anyway. As the saying goes, the right thing and the easy thing are rarely the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Next is Suzanne Gonzalez-Smith, and after that is, I believe it's Wanda Smith. She has doctor's handwriting, I can't tell.
Good evening, everyone. Hey, so I'm really sort of on this idea about doing the universal mandate for masks because I have 9-year-old twins who are compromised due to asthma. So when I hear people come up here and talk about the fact that it doesn't affect children or it affects very few children, I feel like my children are expendable, that it's okay to, let them get sick or worse. And so I'm here in defense for them. They are psyched to go back to school. My husband and I homeschooled them. We really, really worked at doing what was necessary to get through, but they are ready to come back. And I want them to come back safely. The fact that people say that this is not a disease of children, Delta is different. And our own Department of Health in North Dakota has stated this, that children are getting sick. And they're having long-term COVID illnesses after getting COVID. That is making this more of an urgency for children that especially are not vaccinated. Mine cannot be vaccinated. We are all vaccinated around them, but that doesn't help them. The mask lowers the mitigation of the spread. But it works better when everybody's masked. And if we don't have everyone on board, it isn't going to work. And it's not something that we need to rely on politics or your belief system. None of that has anything to do with this decision. Yes, the other side is correct. This decision is on a matter of health. However, you have to listen to those who are in charge. The North Dakota Department of State of Health, the CDC, those are the ones that we should be listening to. And if they tell us that this is the best thing for everyone, regardless of vaccination status, to actually have masks on, then that's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Next up is, I think it's Wendy Smith. 1018 22nd Avenue South. Wesley Smith, sorry. You got to join me because you've got a doctor's signature here. So.
Well, I'm a lefty.
Sorry about that, Mr. Smith.
I've been called worse than Wendy. So I'm here also. I've got 2 great little kids going into the 4th grade, and I'm here to support the idea that, masks do help slow the spread of COVID, particularly the Delta variant. To me, one of the ways that we measure the strength of our community is our discussions and our back and forth, but it's also based on our ability to care for the most vulnerable and to take care of them. And in this case, we're talking about our children, and in some cases, we're talking about elderly in the past more. So I just want to, just encourage you guys to think about that, to listen to the CDC, to the health board. There's been arguments that, you guys shouldn't be making health practices and things of that sort. And I say, you guys aren't exactly making the health practices. You're following the recommendation, or you're looking at following the recommendation of the people who have spent their lives studying these things. And I encourage you to keep doing that. And just want to thank you for listening to all of us, and appreciate the time and energy and thought you're putting into this. So thank you.
Thank you, Wesley. Next up is Mark Rusted, and then after Mark is Bruce Schindler.
Well, thanks for letting me speak. I don't have a whole lot of fans in this room. I'm already aware of that, but that's fine. I live in Grand Forks. We've got 6 kids, 3 of which are in the school system. 1 is about to join if we keep him in. And how do I phrase? So, Mr. Lund, President Lund, you are a physician, correct? Okay, so I hosted a show on the radio a week and a half ago where I had 2 physicians weigh in on my show, right, where they completely disagreed with the masking, and one of them was wishy-washy on the vaccines, the other one was way against it, right? I mean, and they had research and impeccable data to support what their positions were. And then if you were to listen to the same station the following Monday, you would have heard a physician say the exact opposite thing, exactly the opposite. And so what you've got there is a second opinion. You've got people that devote their lives to science and treating folks that have issues, and they completely disagree on the way in which it should be taken care of. And so I guess what I'm here to say is the one thing that we don't disagree on, I know you don't, because the facts are right in front of everybody, is this largely doesn't affect kids. I mean, it's statistically, it's just immaterial. It doesn't do anything to kids hardly at all. I mean, the few cases there have been, you've got, kids that are 500 pounds or, have diabetes or, other diseases that are just, completely overtaking their systems. And so you've got a situation where you're going to deprive every single child in the school system of oxygen while they're trying to learn, deprive their brains of oxygen while they're trying to learn. For what, a statistical anomaly here and there? Has there even been a child in Grand Forks County that has passed? I don't believe so, and if there is, it would be news to me. It doesn't happen. They don't get hospitalized. My kid, it went through my whole family. Everybody had it. And the extent of it was I think she was 3 at the time, my 3-year-old daughter had a fever for about a half of an hour. Tested positive, the whole thing, the only person that really got sick was me. Well, I don't give a shit about myself, About myself, it's your family, it's your kids that you care about, right? And so the fact that we're taking all these measures to harm children, to try to help children, makes no sense. And when you've got physicians, back to my original point, that completely are diametrically opposed on this issue, we're not denying science. We're not saying anything is false or anything. Well, I kind of am, but they're not. It's not settled. Obviously, the jury's not in, and so our fallback cannot be me watching my last year kindergarten, this year first year son in his talent show running a 40-yard sprint wearing a mask over his face in 80-degree sun. That is not reasonable. It's not okay, and I don't plan on complying. And honestly, I don't really care what the board comes down with. I'm not planning on complying with my children, and I guess we'll let the chips fall where they may. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mark. Next up is Bruce Schindler, and after Bruce is Liz Lagergowski.
Thank you so much. My name is Bruce Schindler. I live in Grand Forks. I was here a month ago, and there were a couple of doctors that shared things and about the damage to kids and, critical race. I'm not here to talk about that tonight. We've heard other things already. I'm usually not sick. I don't usually get flu shots. And a vaccine passport, that's something that's coming down the road. I'm not here to talk about that tonight. And I really don't like meetings. I don't like any kind of board meetings. They're hard. They're boring for me usually. But I'm here tonight. And so there's two questions that's come up. Why am I wearing a mask when I don't need to? I mean, I don't really need to. I thought I'd be the only one here tonight with a mask. But I'm over in the room with other people who have masks on, and there's some in here. So, to my friends in the other room, hi, we're all on the same team here. And so, I'm extolling, this is why I'm wearing a mask tonight, to extol the blessings of being able to choose to wear or to not wear a mask. I may not believe the same thing that some of you believe. You have different opinions and different views. You look at different studies. One study will show things, another study will show something else. But the bottom line is, I support your choice if you want to choose that. But we must be able to choose. And so the second question is, why am I here tonight? To answer that, I wrote this. I'm here to support those here in this building and in this community who hold a similar view as mine regarding the welfare of our children. I support you. And to give a warning and an exhortation to those on the school board, here in this room, in the other room, and in the community. That warning is that the root cause of the problems that we face today are not political, they're not only social, economical, they're not race-based. They are of a spiritual nature. And we must return to the principles and the laws that our nations were built on and founded on, or we will continue to reap the consequences, which we are starting to reap. Every morning I try to get up and I read something from the Bible. And that happened today, and I always get something that's applicable. So I'm just going to share with you 6 little verses that are applicable to me today. This is out of 2 Chronicles 12. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon. You may have heard of Solomon, wisest king ever in Israel. Here's what Rehoboam did. His position as king was established, and he had become strong. He and all Israel with him abandoned the law of the Lord because they had been unfaithful to the Lord. Shishak, king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem. So right there, they became prosperous and blessed, and they departed from the law of the Lord. That happens all the time. And so that is something that we need to be warned of, that as we continue to depart from God's ways and standards, all that is going to come from that is hopelessness and despair and hurt. But there is encouragement, and I don't want to leave without that encouragement. There's a lot of encouragement. If you go on and you read, it says, then the prophet Shemaiah came to Rehoboam, and to the leaders of Judah he had assembled in Jerusalem for fear of Shishak, and he said to them, this is what the Lord says, you have abandoned me, therefore I now abandon you to Shishak. The leaders of Israel and the king humbled themselves. They humbled themselves and said, the Lord is just. And when the Lord saw that they humbled themselves, this word of the Lord came to Shemaiah. Since they have humbled themselves, I will not destroy them, but will soon give them deliverance. My wrath will not be poured out on Jerusalem through Shishak. They will, however, become subject to him, so that they may learn the difference between serving me and serving the kings of other lands. And there are kings of other lands that have infiltrated our country and are taking over.
Bruce,
whether
please wrap it up for me.
Okay,
Thanks.
so that's the point that I'm saying is that we have the ability to be blessed of God if we return to him. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bruce. Up next is Liz, and after Liz is Paul Kranielka. Sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name, Paul.
Hi, my name is Liz Ligursky, and I'm a resident here of Grand Forks, and I have 2 children in the Grand Forks Public Schools, one who's in junior high at Schrader, and one who's in elementary school at Viking. My kids attended in-person school last year, and while I totally expected some battles over masks, I was pleasantly surprised that not once did my kids complain about wearing a mask at school. They sang in choir, they acted in plays, they exercised at gym, they participated in intramural sports, they danced after school, all with masks on and all without complaint. Our kids want to be in school, and masks are a small price to pay for in-person learning. Some parents have shared other experiences, and what makes the difference? I believe that our attitudes as parents matters in shaping the experiences of our kids. When we explain to them how their individual decisions impact their friends and their community, they understand, and they want to do their part to help others. We all have individual feelings and opinions on this matter, and I respect and value those opinions. But I'd like to point out that so far tonight, all the educators, and I believe even the healthcare professionals who have taken the time today to be here and to speak, have shared their support for a universal mask policy for the start of the school year, while transmission in our community is high. These are people in our classrooms. They're working with our children. They are the experts in our classrooms. And I believe your job as a school board is to follow the recommendations and best practices of the vast majority of experts as they exist today. So you've already heard all of the reasons for why a universal mask policy has been beneficial, and I'd just like to point out that the American Academy of Pediatrics, their current position is that all students older than 2 and all school staff should wear masks at school unless they have some kind of medical or developmental condition that would prohibit their use. And the reasons for that are because our kids are not eligible for the vaccine. We know that the Delta variant is changing rapidly and it's becoming more contagious and more harmful to younger people. Even if early versions of the virus were not as harmful for our children, these new versions are. We cannot continue to let it spread and mutate and develop and just watch as our children become more infected. I'd like to also point out too that the American Academy of Pediatrics also says that it's important to develop strategies that can be revised and adapted depending on the level of viral transmission and test positivity throughout the community and schools. And so our policies can evolve and they can be adjusted as needed. Right now, transmission seems high, and based on the recommendations of the experts, they suggest that this is one of the things we should do. They also recommend that schools should take a multi-pronged, layered approach to protecting our students, teachers, and staff. Universal masks, ventilation, testing, quarantining, cleaning, disinfecting, they're all layers of protection that will make in-person learning safe and possible. I know that some people here tonight have complained that the advice of the experts has changed, and that's because our understanding of the virus has changed. I know there are some here who have pointed to studies that contradict other studies, right? And those who understand science know that we have to always look at the overwhelming body of the scientific literature and findings. We can always find a study that contradicts or a study that says something differently. We always look at what the overwhelming evidence suggests and shows. And so what we are seeing here today is that as the new Delta variant spreads and as more children are becoming sick, and yes, even dying from COVID-19, one preventable death in our community is one too many. Are masks perfect? No. But the overwhelming majority of the scientific information we have shows that they help. If they help reduce the risk of transmission, even partially, they're worth using as part of the toolkit that we use to protect our students and staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Paul's up next, and then after Paul is Brad Sturluson.
All right, well, excuse me, this is my first time ever being at one of these, so I'm going to keep this short. And I'm not going to thank you for your time. You guys are on my time now. I should be at home with my family. I don't want to be here. So I guess people could call me a social media entrepreneur. And, you know, enforcing a mask mandate on our kids, it's just ridiculous. If people want to live in fear, they can live in fear. You know what? You ever seen the movie The Boy in the Bubble? I suggest you watch it, because if you want your kids to live in a bubble, then go ahead and let them live in it. But my kids hate wearing a mask. They don't get to see their friends' faces. They don't get to do anything as far as all this. And I'm going to go off track of what everybody else is saying here. What I'm going to say is I'm going to devote all of my time and all of my social media to following the money. I want to know where the money is coming, where you guys are getting funded to try to push these mask mandates. Sorry, when I start talking about this, I get really upset because I've seen my child go through a year of despair. So make sure that you guys have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted, because I'm going to follow the money, and I'm going to hold you accountable if we find out there that there is anything that you did that had to do with this as far as money funding to put these stupid face diapers on our kids.
Thank you, Paul. Brad, you're up next.
Hello, my name is Brad Sturlogson. I have 3 kids in the school system. I am going off topic of the face masks. I'd like to ask a question. How many school board members here have children in school? So what half you don't have any kids in school, which really disappoints me, that you're making decisions for my children when you don't have a vested interest in there. With no kids in school, what decisions that you make don't really affect you. They affect me. Most of the people in this room are affected by your decisions when you have no kids in the school. So you don't care, once you leave here, you make a decision, kids can wear masks, you go home and you don't have to reap the benefits or the bad things that happen when your kids do wear masks. So I just think that there should be something where the school board members should have kids in school so they have a vested interest in what happens in the school system. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Brad. Just so you know, several of us have grandchildren in the district, and I love them as much as my kids. So I have a vested interest, and I know Bill does too. So that was the last blue cards I had. Was there anybody else that wanted to speak that didn't turn in a blue card? Just gonna look at. Yep. We have to check the overflow room just to make sure. Okay. Let's move on to item 6, which is superintendent's recommendations for discussion. Cynthia, you're going to review the school board norms.
They are: be prepared, be on time, value and respect each other. Exercise thoughtful deliberation and conversation. Be professional at the board table and when visiting with the general public. Speak up when the norms are not being followed. Advocate on behalf of students and keep the community in mind.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 6B, which is Mentor Center update. Ms. David. And I didn't know, Catherine, did you have anything you wanted to say before we turn it over to Robin?
No, thank you, Robin, for being here. I'm excited to hear your report. So I think you're all very familiar with the Mentor Center, and she'll do a great job of overviewing it.
All right, well, thank you for the chance to get to share a little bit about what's happening at the Mentor Center, one of the Grand Forks Public Schools' newest institutions and a very innovative and interesting institution. And I did send a report to you late last week, so perhaps some of you have copies of that as well. So just the basics first before we jump into things like outcomes and impact. We are a center that is located on the UND campus, close to the UND bookstore. We're right on the edge of campus. And we opened on January 25th. And we will be reopening again at the start of the school year. We are a drop-in facility, which is open to any middle school and high school student in the district anytime during our open hours, weekday afternoons and evenings. And there's absolutely no registration, no referral, no paperwork required. As a drop-in facility, students can come and use that space anytime. And when I think about how to describe the Mentor Center, because again, it's a unique kind of institution, I often think of the concept of, I don't know how many of you have read the Harry Potter books, but the room of requirement, which was a hidden room in Hogwarts, which appeared only in times of very great need, and it would be there to supply whatever it was that person happened to need. And we know that the pandemic has caused a significant need for students. District officials were well aware of that. And through that great need, the Mentor Center emerged. And like that room of requirement, it is a very adaptable kind of space that is made to be responsive to the needs of the particular students there. And it can transform and be very nimble to meet those needs. So when a student comes in the door, we literally and figuratively meet them where they're at. We check in with them, we greet them enthusiastically, and find out how we can best serve them. What is it that they need right now? And for some students, that might be they need help with a particular assignment. They are struggling with that. They need someone to help them with it. In other cases, they might just need some motivation and some structure to get their work done. Other times they might just have a technical problem. Maybe their Chromebook isn't working and they need support with that. Others just come to the Mentor Center simply to have a private space to study where they can have Wi-Fi and access to people there if they happen to need it. Others come specifically for our programming. We have different kinds of sessions that we hold each day, multiple sessions. Some of them are enrichment-based, some of them are social emotional learning. We've done a little bit of everything and have a very dynamic schedule. Some come just for that. Some come to spend time with friends in a very safe and supported environment. And while they're there, they have the opportunity to have free food that is available through the Child Nutrition Program and can bring home food that is available and brought to us for all students every week through the Northlands Rescue Mission. Whatever it is that they happen to need, we work to meet that need. We've also been able to have busing last spring for a couple of months that helped to get students there who might not have been able to or would have had a difficult time to get there. So when we meet them, you know, our staff, we have 12 to 15 staff members. They're very, very adaptable staff. So some of them have backgrounds in mental health. Some of them are in an academic context. But if what a student needs when they come in the door is to go shoot hoops and let off some steam before talking to someone, they lace up their sneakers and go out there and do that with students. So 12 to 15 staff members working in either academics or mental health, as well as technical assistance, a technology support staff member. We also have a number of volunteers who serve our students at the center. A number of them, not all, are UND students, and it's worked out very wonderfully for them to get some kinds of hands-on real-life experience working with students in a supervised setting. And our location on the UND campus has made it really easy to facilitate those kinds of partnerships with UND programs also. In our first year, we were funded through the Governor's Emergency Education Relief, the GEAR grant, and UND also donated our space in the spring, which was a tremendous help with our budget. This year, we are funded through ESSER funds, and we will be renting the space from UND. Now, with the students that we've served at the Mentor Center, I think what's significant to note is that we have over 2,000 visits. Not a single one of those was required. Not a single one of those was because this was an obligation they needed to fulfill for school. They came because they wanted to, and we knew that when we opened the center, we needed to make sure we built a space that students would want to come to and would want to come back to. And so when I look at those numbers of the 200 students that we have served and the 2,000 visits, I'm confident that my staff did their job of making sure students know that they are valued. The breakdown of those student populations that were coming in were split quite evenly between middle school and high school. And 70% of them were doing in-person, 30% remote. So that means that for 70% of them, they were already doing 35 hours a day in in-person school, and then they would still opt to come now and then to the Mentor Center and spend additional time with us at another school facility. With our stats too, you can see that we had from all of the in-district school or in-town schools in the district, we had students coming with very much the highest numbers coming from Grand Forks Central High School, Valley Middle School, and Schrader Middle School. We will be doing outreach at all of the schools this year to make sure that all students are aware of the opportunities available for them at the Mentor Center. Further demographics and information on the students, you can see with the chart here that populations that are typically represented at minority levels within the school district were represented at higher levels within the Mentor Center. We also had about a fifth of our students who were on an IEP, about a tenth of our students who were receiving English learner services, and 11.6% who qualify as homeless. Now, with the impact, in measuring the impact over the course of these 4 months that we were open during the academic year and then that one additional month in the summer, we wanted to make sure that we were capturing both academics and mental health, and we know very much the link between the two. If mental health is struggling, academics will decline, and when academics are declining, that often has an impact on mental health. So when we did this assessment, we wanted to be sure to capture good data on both of them. And with mental health impact, we used the Panorama tool, which is now available in the district, which has extensive surveys that are available to be utilized, as well as tools for staff. And what we found with mental health impact from the beginning of time, the times that students started coming to the Mentor Center until the end of the school year, we saw significant growth in 3 particular areas. That was having a support system, as well as having fewer
negative feelings and increased positive feelings. And so that meant for students in a very real way, feeling more excited, feeling more hopeful, feeling cared about, loved, less frustrated, and having access to people both within and outside of the schools who were accepting to them. So we were very encouraged to see those increases of about 10 points in those surveys. For academic impact, we looked at both data for our student populations, people who are coming to the Mentor Center, as well as pulling together data from all secondary students in the district, and found that secondary students from quarter 2 to quarter 4 increased their GPAs almost 7%, so that was very good. Students who are coming to the Mentor Center increased it 12%, so we were quite encouraged by that number. A number of students who are coming more often increased their GPAs even more. School attendance dipped slightly for our Mentor Center students. This was attendance at their home schools. However, they dipped at a lower rate than students throughout that district, so there was a little bit of a decline from quarter 2 to quarter 4. And I think that with all of this data was really wonderful to get our hands on and to be able to see and gauge that impact, especially as we think to next year. But what's also significant, I think, and was much more impactful as well for all of our staff who worked there and got that opportunity to see the experiences firsthand and get to know the students and the very heavy weights many of them are carrying, and to see a number of successes. There were just so many beautiful moments. So here's a chance just to hear a little bit from the student voices about their experience at the Mentor Center. I think we're not getting volume on the...
First I sign in, then I go play sports with the teachers, like basketball. We played soccer before, and football.
Before. I can start it. Oh. There we are.
If we can't get it up, you could read them to us. I don't know if you have them with you.
Absolutely. And with the video is captioned as well. I did send the link to all of you at some point too. I will happily send that again. There we are.
Well, when school still in session, I would mainly work on math because there was a time I felt really behind, and so Miss Fook really helped me out with my math, and thankfully I was able to pass. I've done some art activities. I do a lot of poetry.
Art, the drums, and being outside and sporting, and building towers.
I like to, play games and go on walks and actually get my homework done, because if I didn't come here, then it just wouldn't get done.
I do a lot. Like, I just come here to just be myself, so I can just do what I want. Like, art is one of my passions, so I do that a lot here, and it's nice to be recognized, like, especially for artwork when you can't do it at your house. Like, you can come here and just put it up like the art show, and yeah, it's nice.
It's a very welcoming atmosphere. I can feel like I can be my
right, since our students were not back yet in person, we wanted a chance to be able to, for you to hear their voices and get a chance to listen to them talking a little bit about their experiences there at the Mentor Center. So with that, as we brace for next year and get ready for that, we're going to be working on much the same model that we did the first year, having seen the impact. We were designed to be a very nimble institution that can adapt as situations change. And I think we are at a good place of doing some experimenting in the spring and seeing really good outcomes. And so we're going to be continuing with the same goals of mental health and academics, and continuing in our rented space on the UND campus, which has afforded us a lot of wonderful green space to be able to use, as well as UND resources. We're going to be increasing communications and connections with district officials and staff to more integrate what we're doing with what the schools are working on, as well as adding a social media presence this year. So we'll be on several different platforms. I'd encourage you to join, follow, and share some of that content, as well as we get the word out to the community, to students, to parents, and to staff about what's going on at the Mentor Center. And I know that a number of you have been able to come out to our space and walked through and taken a tour, and that's wonderful. I want all of you to know that there's an open invitation. If you would like to do a tour anytime, I'd be happy to visit with you. As well, if you have any questions right now, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions for Ms. David or Ms. Glatch? I had one, and it's probably more for Catherine. So how about the 22-23 school year? Oh, I know this covers last year and this year. Are we anticipating more long-term needs?
That's to be determined. So Ms. David and her crew have done a really great job of gathering data, as you see, and what we really want to do is make sure that we're investing our dollars in a way that impact students the most significantly. And so far, we've funded this upcoming year because they've given evidence of that. Really, sometimes some people have criticized and said, well, why isn't it serving more kids? I would argue the contrary to that. Every student there that has been served has, I'm convinced that the Mentor Center has literally been life-saving to some kids. I'll start there at an emotional level. The staff there has supported some kids through some really challenging times. And then from the academic standpoint, the number of credits that they helped students achieve have saved them to staying on track for graduation. So it's met that twofold goal. And we just hope to increase the programming. There's some opportunities for collaborative programming with other programs that we have, kind of daytime programs in our district that could use additional supports. And so whether or not we continue it in the future will be determined by the data. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Go ahead, Amber. Oh, Amber first, then Shannon.
I just have more of a comment than anything. I had the privilege of going to the Mentor Center and taking a tour, and it was an experience that I think will become a model for other school districts around the nation. I was able to see students utilizing the space. In just the few short months that it had been set up, it looked like it had been there for 5 years. I mean, there was art on every corner of the wall, there was science experiments, there was plants, there were alternative furniture, there were people utilizing the space, there was a sort of like a Zen obstacle course. I mean, every single thing that you could think of that a student would need, whether they expressed it or not, the staff had thought of as well. And to hear the stories and see the kids of, we saw the statistic that almost 12% of the students that use it were homeless. I mean, we were literally giving kids with this option a place to go where they may not have been able to go. Robin took me into the kitchen and they had snacks and fresh food from our school nutrition. So they're eating meals while they're there. It was a purposeful, accidental program that came about because we had some money and people had an idea and applied for a grant. And I hope that we can continue to fund it because like Catherine said, it was a life-changing experience for me to see as a board member, to say that we have filled some gaps that were known for students, and we've also probably filled a lot of gaps that were unknown. And I think that we are helping our children in the district in a lot more ways than we know. And I'm excited to see what the next few years bring with this program.
Thank you. Shannon, go ahead.
Yeah, and Catherine, you kind of alluded to it, but Robin too, please feel free. So one of the questions that I asked at looking at the funding and go forward funding for the Mentor Center were, how do you think things will shift with, us not having a hybrid or out of, everybody being back in the classroom, considering the hours are from, 1 to 8 p.m. or something like that, and that being kind of, okay, now we have students that are in until 3. Do you see the 2 hours being utilized in another way that we can, kind of justify the continued level of funding? So just kind of curious what, if you have a crystal ball sort of perspective on what that's going to be, it'd be interesting to hear what you think, some of the duplication in programs or some support that you can offer the district.
Absolutely. I will add some, and then Catherine, you're welcome to add more too. One of the things that we're doing this year with the modifications is to shift staffing to that 3 to 8 o'clock time period. So there will be a limited number of people who are working those first 2 hours and will be there to support students if they are on site, but be using that time as well, doing case management and outreach. One of the things that we have done a lot of as an educational institution is outreach in a way that a traditional school wouldn't typically be doing. Our staff have sent thousands and thousands of emails and made hundreds of phone calls to let students know, to let families know about the services that we have available. And that element is pretty time intensive. And so as we're working with students who are dealing with situations of credit recovery or are encountering challenging situations, there's a lot of back and forth outreach with perhaps school counselors or with families, with social workers in the community. We have a lot of involvement in a number of things. So we have limited staffing during those first 2 hours, but we will still be open to serve students during that time if they are there on site. But it was typically 3 o'clock when our numbers would go up.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Dr. Brenner.
Sorry, I have one final comment. I think the board was made aware before that under Robin's leadership, kind of tying into what you're saying, Amber, the center was recognized at the Governor's Innovation Summit. You talk about a program that might be a model program that other districts have wanted to learn from and replicate. There's a lot of power in what they're doing with kids, and I think there were some of our colleagues that their ears perked up and they've reached out to figure out what the magic is, and the magic is occurring under Robin's leadership. So I just want to commend her and all the team at the Mentor Center for winning that accolade.
Ditto, according to Dr. Brenner. Any other questions or comments? Robin, thank you. I think as a board, we will look forward to maybe getting an update sometime during the school year just to see how things are going. So thank you. Appreciate that. Let's move on to item 7, Superintendent's recommendations for actions. Smart Restart update, Dr. Brenner.
Thank you, Dr. Lund. On page 7 of your packet, you have in front of you a memo from me. And before I even dive into the memo, I just want to reiterate, because I think it bears repeating, that North Dakota was one of 2 states that saw school districts start on time for the most part and see the school year throughout the school year from beginning to end, which included extracurricular activities through district, regional, state tournaments. So we did well, and we did well amidst the controversy. We did well making difficult decisions based on the information that we had in front of us at the time, and we made decisions that forced us to pivot when data changed, and sometimes when the guidelines were amended. So in preparing for this school year, we felt like we were in a really good place. We still feel like we're in a really good place. But there was a new indicator or a new metric that was put in front of us that we've been asked to pay attention to, and that's the transmission indicator. If we didn't look at the transmission indicator at all, we would just look at how our county is doing as a whole, because we're in the green, which means our community is wide open. With the transmission indicator has created another data point for us to make decisions around or make recommendations around. And I think that's what's created some of the consternation with some of the pushback in our community. And by the way, I thank everybody who is here to voice your opinions, because your opinions are valued, whether we agree or disagree or we find some compromise in between. That tells me that the community is engaged with our school district and you're paying attention, and I thank you for that. So we appreciate that you're here this evening, regardless of position. So with that, we started our summer school. I just want to back up a week. On August 2nd, we started our K-8 summer school with masks as optional, not required at this time. And probably what was underscored is at this time, because we knew there might be the opportunity where we would have to change and adjust. And so as our community or our county was in the green, we were also in the yellow, the moderate transmission, which is, again, one of the new indicators. That shifted to the orange, which is substantial transmission. And basically what happened was we went from 48 cases to 50, and that changed the dynamic. And I certainly anticipated changing our language from optional, not required at this time, to recommended was going to create a buzz among the community. And I think that's what we're certainly hearing tonight. For the people who are in the audience who maybe don't follow the work that we do on a weekly basis, we just want you to know that the school district administration doesn't work in a vacuum. We have what we call a Smart Restart committee that meets on a weekly basis, and that committee also consists of public health, who follows their own guidelines, state guidelines, and national guidelines, CDC, et cetera. So we have some pretty in-depth conversations about where we're at and what kind of adjustments we might need to make. So I think that's what brings us to tonight. Also with us in the audience would be some public health officials, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get everybody here, but I do know that Teresa Knox is here. Sean McBride, state epidemiologist, is here representing the state, and I'm not sure if Katie is here, Goldaddy. Yes, Katie is there, and Teresa Farmer. Yes, we've got all four of you here tonight. Thank you very much for being here and listening to the conversation. So what you have in front of you is basically some wordsmithing, where we're recommending that we change our status from masks being optional, not required at this time, to masks are recommended. Nowhere in that language does it say masks are mandatory. That's coming from an administrative recommendation from our Smart Restart Committee. The board may have a different perspective on that. But I'd also like to remind everybody that this isn't the final meeting before the first day of school. We have a meeting next Monday night following our joint meeting. It's not a scheduled meeting yet, but we have a time and a place where we would be together again on August 16th. And then we have a time and a place where we would be together again on August 23rd, which is pushing up close to the start of the school year, which is August 25th. So basically, that's my long way of recapping the memo, just indicating that based on our most recent data that we're looking at, it was agreed that masks would be recommended for all while inside of Grand Forks public school facilities or leased indoor facilities as the county moved into the substantial transmission, which is orange, and that would be communicated with all district stakeholders in advance of the first day of instruction. I'll certainly try to get a little bit closer. And so again, it's being recommended that all stakeholders inside of Grand Forks public school facilities or leased facilities, it would be recommended that people wear masks. And nothing has been communicated to teachers. I just want to make that clear. It was stated earlier by one of our community members that some communication went to teachers saying that that masks are required. Nothing like that has been communicated yet. We want to put this in front of the board for conversation, and I would open it up at this time.
Comments, questions, thoughts from board members? Bill?
Yeah, I just have one. I researched some of this, and I look at what Moorhead has stated, what Moorhead, Minnesota has stated in their recommendation for a start, and it's pretty much following the same as what we have in front of us, that it's recommended, but they added the word after it, but not required. while indoors. And I think that would, if we are going to go with this statement, that would remove some of that questions that a lot of people have had.
Other questions? Go ahead, Shannon.
What's, fundamentally, what's the difference between optional and recommended from just from a administrative standpoint and then from a enforcement standpoint?
Well, I'll answer the second part of the question. There wouldn't be enforcement. It's just being recommended based on CDC guidelines. And we just used the vernacular that CDC came out with and removed our verbiage that we had for summer school.
It's really the recommendation is bringing our language into alignment with what CDC has published at this point.
That's even a better way to say it.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. I was struggling with the distinction between optional and recommended. They seemed synonymous to me. From an enforcement standpoint, there's no enforcement, right? It's discretionary, and so just wanted to clarify why are we changing it then, and thank you for that.
Other questions, comments, thoughts? Go ahead, Shannon.
So I have a question for some of the maybe state or local Department of Health, and it's really just one question so that I have
Say,
an
Shannon,
understanding.
one way, you got to talk right into the mic.
Okay.
I know we have a tendency to look at who we're talking to, but then they can't hear you, so thank you.
Feel like they can't hear me if I'm talking this way, but they can. Yeah. I've never been accused of not being heard. So the question I have is tied to contact, close contact, and quarantine requirements. As I understand, those are still in effect today, and will those still continue? And then if you're properly wearing a mask exception, still fundamentally part of that quarantine, close contact?
Sean, looks like you got elected, so thank you.
There we are. So I just first wanted to correct the record. I'm the regional epidemiologist. Tracy Miller, the state epidemiologist, gets a little prickly when that is said differently. So anyways, I can answer that question. So with the rescission of the state health officer emergency orders for quarantine and isolation, with that also went that mask-to-mask contact exception. Contact tracing, contact exposure, quarantines would still be recommended as they have been from the health department. But there would be no mask-to-mask contact exception because that went along with those orders. So people exposed wearing mask-to-mask would be still recommended to quarantine based upon the deferment to CDC guidelines, because that mask-to-mask contact was something North Dakota Department of Health did outside of CDC guidance. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, and so it invites another question then. So how are we as a school district then addressing that recommended quarantine? Is that, so if we get a positive student, we go through contact tracing, if it's recommended that they quarantine and isolate, what are we doing then with those kids?
We don't have final distinction plans on that, but that's new news to me.
I think we need to have those discussions. Teresa, could you speak specifically? Has that been something that you have been continuing that? Okay. So, I mean, in practice, that may be what's being applied, but the technical part of the order left with those orders. So it was kind of a restart and then a deferment to CDC guidance in a technical sense. In practice, the mask-to-mask guidance, it looks like that has been continuing.
It had been.
It looks like it has been. Yeah, I was.
So we would like to continue with that practice.
I think that's reasonable. If you're looking for, like I said, in the technical sense, we might have to have discussions with the state if that's something that they're doing or would encourage doing or recommend.
If I can just articulate my thought and my reason for asking
Go ahead.
these, so I can just say the way I'm viewing this, and so everybody can understand. So the reason I ask these very direct questions is not so much because I care whether, it's of opinion or of science that masks are effective or ineffective. certainly, I can't weigh in on a political or scientific matter not having done a significant amount of research. And the research I have done is really tied to, you know, and I've said this to some folks, it's one of many opportunities to try to reduce contact with a virus that is still emergent. It's been around for a year, but it's still emergent. And that's really what it comes down to. Practical, boots on the ground. My number one priority as a school board member and as a parent is keeping kids in the classroom. You don't get education to the standards that Grand Forks expects, and we expect as a board or as an administration via hybrid. We did really well. I'm not faulting or saying that the hybrid program wasn't exceptional this year. It was exceptional. However, we can all agree that the number one success factor, both socially, emotionally, and educationally, is to have butts in the seats. What is not effective from a stress standpoint on kids or parents or teachers is having kids rotating in and out because they're coming in close contact. Whether they get the virus or not, that single distinction of one person coming in contact with others has such an impact and a ripple, not only for the student, but for the teacher and for the family. And it's a little bit self-interested on my part, but to me, that is the single biggest determining factor for me in whether I support a mask requirement or a mask recommendation, is whether or not we are going to have to quarantine kids because they've come in contact with somebody who's COVID positive. Because to me, that works against our number one priority, which is keeping kids in school. I think as parents, we all agree, as educators, we agree, and as administrators, we agree on that. And so I know it's as yet to be determined, and maybe there's still some discussion, but it's gonna be really hard for me to say, okay, I can support a recommendation right now, given the local data that we have. But at the next conversation, I'd like to know whether kids are going to have to quarantine if there isn't a mask exception, or if there is one, because that's hugely important to me to keeping kids in the classroom.
Thank you, Amber, and then Chris.
To Shannon's point, I'm on 100% the same page. I think I sensed some confusion, and I was a little confused, and there was a little back and forth there. So if you could just, Sean, break it down to like a layperson term. So what are the quarantine requirements if you are identified as a close contact? So as an example, my child is a close contact with another child in the classroom. No masks are worn. What does that phone call look like?
So once a close contact is identified, the individual, or in this case, you know, the parent of the child, would be contacted and informed of their exposure, the date of the exposure, and then given the dates for when they should begin their quarantine, recommended dates for testing. It's recommended contacts are tested 3 to 5 days after their first exposure. And then at day 7, if they're tested the day before, 6, 7, and they're negative, their quarantine can discontinue. So it wouldn't extend the full 14 days. Without testing, it would extend for 14 days. And then again, if anyone becomes symptomatic, then that kind of moves into a probable case classification, where they could be a case and it's recommended they're tested. If they test negative, then that is ruled out, and they would not be considered a case. If they're not tested, then they are considered a case, and then their isolation period would begin from their symptom onset.
Okay, so you said should quarantine. Is that a choice or mostly a requirement?
It's a strong recommendation from the health department in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19, and as was mentioned, the downstream effects of potentially infectious individuals exposing others and kind of making an unfortunate situation worse.
So if masks are not worn and there is a close contact, we could potentially have a classroom shut down because those individuals would be quarantined.
I mean, I can't speak to whether or not a classroom would be shut down, but I can say that anybody that's determined to be within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes during that time period would be recommended to quarantine. And so that's, whether that's an entire class or some of the students, I couldn't say.
Sure. And right now, we're seeking more clarification on what that would mean if all individuals are masked.
Yeah, I think I tripped over the technicality. So when
Yeah.
those things left, it's technically not there, but in practice, it has remained.
Okay.
So
Okay.
in practice, it has stayed, but in a technical sense, we've moved to the CDC recommendations, which does not include that.
So in practice, if I got a phone call and all of the individuals in my child's classroom were masked, the recommendation would be to not isolate or quarantine unless they had symptoms in practice.
Correct. They would be mask-to-mask contacts and would be exempted from the quarantine recommendation based upon wearing the masks in
Okay.
practice.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm thinking as a parent observing this evening and watching, I guess it's a quite simple question, yet they may be asking themselves, so at what point would the district look at saying we are going to mask? Would it be when it gets red? Would it be a certain number? That may not have been determined yet. I know we have some time until school starts. Yet a parent watching, what is the line, if you will, where masks would be mandated? And I understand, Dr. Brenner, you're working with, like you said, and you've been working with these groups, so I'm not trying to, if that's something that's still in process, I'll certainly respect that yet. I'm just trying to ask a question a parent may be thinking about.
No, that's fine, and I think we might be able to provide some clarity right now. If you recall, last year we used the points of consideration matrix, and that was the percent of positive cases that we would have in a classroom, in a building, in a school, to make determinations whether a classroom would shut down, a school would shut down, the district would shut down. And obviously we had to pivot to distance learning for 17 days because of our staff, not so much because of our kids. So that's still going to be one metric. The other piece we want to add is, at what point do we look at the transmission indicator that's going to be that number? Because there's quite a range from substantial 50 to 99.99 to 100. That's a large range, and I think that's why this has created so much consternation. When we went from, sorry, thank you for the cue in the back. When we went from moderate transmission to substantial, that was a result of 2 cases, again, going 48 to 50. So I think we'll want to take a look at that with public health and determine what would that number be, and would that number be a district number, would it be a building number, would it be a classroom number? So we want to be a little surgical in our approach to this. The other thing I just want to clarify, since Sean and I had a little bit of an awkward moment, with that exchange, what we have in our health and safety guidelines, our draft 2021-22 school year, is students and staff who are experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 should stay home and away from others as much as possible for 10 days unless they can provide a negative COVID-19 test or an alternate diagnosis from a healthcare provider. That's one bullet. Another bullet is students and staff who test positive for COVID-19 will be required to isolate for 10 days per CDC guidelines. So we're saying required there, not recommend. And the third bullet, our school district will encourage students and staff that are notified they are close contacts to a positive case outside of school to complete their recommended quarantine period unless vaccinated. So with all of that, we still have the honor system, right? So this is going to be, it's going to have a little bit of a different feel to it. So while we have a framework in place to make our decisions, honesty is going to be a big piece to making those decisions.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just to reiterate, because Sean and I go back to the time of Moses, and isolation and quarantining is not something brand new. We've been doing it for years with chickenpox, with TB, with other diseases. It's not like that. This has all of a sudden became new with COVID. It's an infectious disease standard that we use not too infrequently. So people think it's all brand new. It's not. This is established protocols and practice with other infectious diseases as well. So, go ahead, Melissa.
Teachers are going to ask if they are vaccinated, do they still have to quarantine? Because that's going to be a major question for them. If they're not masked, but they are vaccinated, then are you also exempt from that quarantine if you're not showing symptoms?
Yes, at this time, vaccination would exempt someone from quarantine. You're considered protected.
Is that the same if they were to test positive and they are vaccinated?
So one thing that has changed in updated guidance is vaccinated contacts are recommended to test at that 3 to 5 day window. And so if they were to test positive during that period of time, they would be considered a case and then would be asked to isolate based upon either the development of symptoms as the start date or if they remain asymptomatic, the test collection date.
Other questions, comments, thoughts? Go ahead, Cynthia.
I don't have real formulated thoughts. But this is what my concern is. I have a couple. One is the word recommendation. I'm not convinced that that's the greatest approach moving forward. I understand where we are now, so I'm sitting tight on that, but I think that that's going to be problematic just because we're going to see pushback. Secondly, I have concerns about whether we've communicated that there's no distance learning option. So I don't know if that word has gotten out. The parents that I have talked to, and I do talk to a lot of different parents, even though I don't have children in school, I'm affiliated through my work with many different schools, and there's concern there. So if they don't have that option of distance learning, which my understanding is that there is none, I don't know what some of the parents that I've talked to will do in terms of, homeschooling for some is just not an option. So that would be my concern about recommendations, because if they're very opposed or very worried, they don't really have another option if we don't require masking in school.
Yeah, I understand that, Cynthia. Distance learning is not an option this year. To stand that up is a substantial investment that our budget cannot afford. And I did check in with my other superintendent colleagues of the other large districts, and I believe Bismarck, Mandan might be standing something up together, collaborating, but Fargo, West Fargo, Minot are not. We have some online options. We have Center for Distance Education options. We have Edmentum as course options. So I know Ms. Galach is working on a blended opportunity, which is part of our strategic plan anyway. But to stand something up as a singular school required us to basically start another school district. We didn't have the same flexibility that we did last year.
Appreciate that. So I think that that's where this hard conversation has to come in, that we really need to be careful about the idea of having it just be recommended for those who are really concerned. That was kind of my point.
Other questions, comments, thoughts? Jackie?
So I spent a great amount of time kind of researching COVID, learning about COVID. I also try to, where I can, get things that have to do with educational policy or policy formation in general. And this is one of those situations where so many different areas kind of come together, as we've heard from a lot of people who've spoken today. You might be focusing more on parental choice, or you might be focusing on health, or you might be focusing on mental health versus physical health. There's so many things to consider here. And so when I have a situation like this, I kind of have to rely on experts in all different areas. We're looking at experts in education, public health, infection, everything, right? Policy. And I agree with something someone said today, which, policy is not being perfect. They didn't exactly say that, but they did say that there are other things that affect kids and we don't have policies on that. And I would agree, we have holes in policy all the time. So we do the best that we can. For me, when I have a hard time making a decision and we have some different values that conflict, I try to go to something I learned as a social worker, which is let's look at, what is, in some level you can categorize values, right? And you can make a decision based on those. And self-determination, choice is certainly a value. And for me, I believe protection of others, I think you have choice when it doesn't harm other people. This is one of those situations where choice could harm somebody else based on what we know today. And in going to some online trainings by people who do policy work, in infection control. One of the things that has risen to the top is this idea of mandates definitely are going to get you better results than recommendations in terms of slowing down infection, or increasing vaccination if you're talking about vaccination. And so I am not in favor of using the word recommended. I believe we do need to have a mandate. And I believe that that's something that, unfortunately, I mean, I don't like it either, needs to happen right away instead of waiting for some magical number, because as students and as student learners, and what I know about education, having some education degrees, is that, you know, we want to create habits early. That first week of school is so important with learning rules and habits and things of that nature. And I believe that students will fare better with any changes if that mandate is there to begin with. And I do want to protect staff who may be vulnerable. I want to protect my special education students that are in the school district who have underlying health conditions, because I do not believe in survival of the fittest, and I believe that those students have a right to be in an area where they know that the person next to them is wearing a mask, unless, you know, our special education experts have deemed that they can't, right? So I just think those are really important pieces. And so for me, it's really, I mean, it comes about, it's a part of protecting the whole and protecting people that are vulnerable, protecting our staff, but also not impacting education has been brought up here. If we have staff going home sick all the time and teachers going in and out, I know my students complained about that last year, and we were doing the best we could. So I think that impacts kids' education much more than wearing a mask. And so I'm not in favor of a recommended wordage. I'm in favor of a mandate.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Amber?
I just have a question about indoor versus outdoor. Some of the recommendations we've seen have consistently said that, like, the CDC and AAP require or recommend masks be worn indoors. Could someone from public health just explain maybe the variation of, are they not recommended outdoors? Are they? Is it not as important? Or
We'll have our regional epidemiologist answer that. So.
Dr. Miller would appreciate that. So the big difference that we're looking at between these environments, and the CDC and the AAP kind of have, when you move outside, which is different than the general community guidance for schools, when you move outside, considering how crowded the environment is or how close kids are together, whether or not they would recommend masks outside. But the primary difference between those environments is just basically air dilution. How much space, distance, and air movement do you have between people who are potentially infectious? And when you're outside, particularly during the daytime in the sunlight, sun can be sterilizing, the air is moving, those types of things, and it really does reduce the risk to someone being exposed and infected in an outdoor environment just due to the air dilution that we have, which we don't have as well in indoor environments where virus can build up or hang in the air longer or those types of things.
Thank you. I would maybe follow up with the district. We limited visitors last year, so when we had a mask requirement, we also had very limited visitation. And so, you know, the public has asked us to talk about compromise, and if we're making decisions, is there compromise somewhere? So whether or not we ever recommend or require masks, has the district talked about how visitation would be handled? Will those individuals be allowed to come in as long as they're following either the recommendation or requirement or whatnot?
Yeah, in our health and safety guidelines, again, draft, building visitors would be allowed but limited. Consultation should occur with the building's leadership regarding safety plans. So it's pretty broad right now.
Dr. Brennan, could you clarify just a couple of questions I had from some comments in the audience. Is there any plan, or has there been any plan to mandate vaccinations for employees of the school district? And is there any plan or discussion about mandating vaccinations for school children within the school district, or is that not a statewide type of discussion?
Appreciate the question for clarification. Both answers are no. No and no.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Oh, Chris, and then Jackie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Evan, you're going to be a senior this year. You're our student representative. You've been hearing a lot of discussion this evening. Recommended, mandate. You as a student, what are your thoughts of what this discussion is as you enter your senior year?
A few things definitely come to mind. One would be like extracurriculars, because I haven't heard a lot of talk about that. So like, I think the indoor sport that's big right now would be girls volleyball. So like, would that require girls volleyball players to have to wear a mask constantly throughout their games? Because that would be a more of a protective act that we've had the past year, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, I guess, because it seems, I don't know if some people would agree, but it seems like less of a risk as of now than it was a year ago. We were at that point. And then also the fact when you say like mandate and stuff like that, I have no problem with wearing a mask, but my mom teaches elementary school kids and stuff like that, and I know that it's hard for her to get her kids to wear a mask over your nose, and you'd be surprised, but there's some seniors in high school that is just as hard to get them to wear their mask over their nose. So when it comes to that, it becomes a distraction as well. So like your quality of education goes down a little bit, but I grant you it's also a lot less of a quality of or a lot more of a quality of an education if you don't have your teacher and you have a sub for 2 weeks as well. So it's kind of a give and take there.
Thank you.
I'll answer Evan's question based on volleyball. What we learned last year was it's pretty difficult in respiratory indoor sports to wear a mask, and those masks are pretty liquidated after a couple of minutes of practice. So coaches basically have put teams in cohorts. Teams who practice together, they kind of know which 4, 5, 6 athletes are practicing together. So if there's a positive case, then we knew how to contact trace. So that practice would continue.
I have a tendency to agree with that, but on the other hand, when you're huffing and puffing really hard and you're working hard, you're more likely to spread virus, just so you know that. Jackie?
I was hoping someone from public health could talk about how long someone is infectious, whether they're having symptoms or not, how that's determined. One of the arguments I could see happening as well, how about you just require, if I have symptoms, my kid just won't go to school, and so it'll be fine. And so I want to make sure that that's kind of discussed.
I would say that I would caution anybody to determine their infectiousness based upon their presentation. So asymptomatic individuals have been shown to be as infectious as mildly infected individuals and severely ill individuals. And for COVID-19, that's not the only illness that type of a phenomenon is known. It occurs in other illnesses, respiratory illnesses as well.
There are some diseases that the infectivity is 7 days or 5 days, some viruses. Unfortunately, this fits all the other respiratory ones that there's a range. And I think the initial studies were done looking at, are they still shedding virus or not? So we have kind of ranges, but it's not an exact science. Like you all know, I harp on every meeting. There's a black and a white, and there's a middle of the gray, and we're in the middle of the gray. Go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, if I may expound upon that, I think the greatest challenge we've had with COVID-19 is the fact that pre-symptomatic individuals or those at the initial stages of their symptoms, basically before they start altering their behaviors, are at their most infectious point. So that's when their infectious potential is at its greatest. And unfortunately, that means that proactive prevention measures are the most effective at preventing the spread of COVID-19.
That sort of touches on a question that I had posed to you, Dr. Lund, in an email from the other week, and I'm curious if you got any response back. But there's a lot of conjecture and some very conclusive statements that this doesn't harm kids, or that COVID has been shown not to harm kids. And one thing that I've started trending and seeing pop up are press releases from like Children's Hospital in certain states where they're seeing spikes in pediatric patients being admitted and some being admitted for ICU care. And so I had sent one to Dr. Lunn and just posed the question as to whether, and it was more generally, do we know anything about trending data? So from a proactive standpoint, are there any things that we can learn from some of these other states that have been and much worse off with their numbers and their infection rate, and especially with these new variants? Are we seeing anything different in trends with pediatric patients at this point? So
I heard back, but I didn't hear any great trending data. They didn't send me any data or anything like that. What the consensus was is that it went from really low incidence to really high in about a month. I mean, it wasn't overnight, but it rose fairly rapidly, which is what we've seen in other waves as well. Is that, I mean, it goes and then it starts picking up, but it doesn't happen overnight. But I mean, within a month it was, and it isn't just Arkansas. I mean, there's several states that have run out of ICU beds for pediatrics, and they're flying kids to other areas of the country that have a lower incidence. So I mean, it's definitely affecting them. But the speakers that spoke earlier, it's a mild illness for most people, even my age. It's a mild illness. But the last data I looked at over the weekend, there's been 371 pediatric deaths. Okay, that's 371 out of millions and millions of kids. But if you happen to be the parent of one of those 371, you don't really care what the odds are. In the height of varicella and some of the other diseases, we had less deaths per year, but yet we've proceeded with vaccination stuff. Smallpox used to be a horrible scourge, but it's a remnant gone unless somebody develops a bioweapon with it, which we always worry about. So I didn't hear, they didn't send me any direct data, but the colleagues I have in Arkansas said, yeah, it took about a month to really ramp up, and they were out of ICU beds when I talked to them last.
And this kind of goes back to fundamentally, I'm a framework systems person, so I try to cling to guiding principles. Because to cling to otherwise, especially as Dr. Lund pointed out a couple weeks back, you can find anything you want in a medical journal as it relates to particularly this virus, but probably broadly speaking, because we don't have the luxury of hindsight yet to really know with certainty who was right and who was wrong and what was the data really telling us. So my guiding principle, the one is getting as many kids back in the classroom as possible. There's so many reasons why we know K-12 is imperative to life, livelihood, and success beyond just education for these kids. I do fear that, I guess not fear, but I have concern that, the vulnerable populations here, their parents are going to have to make very tough decisions to potentially not send their kids to school. I mean, it's like the same reason why we don't allow nuts in schools. We're nut-free. That's to protect the vulnerable, right? Like, I may really like peanut butter, but we all agree, like, one kid dying of airborne peanut dust is awful. And so we all agree we're not going to allow peanuts in our building, right? Like, that's not a medical choice. That's just a public kind of safety choice, right? It's not even public health mandated. We just do it. So I think of it in that sense. And then the other part of it is keeping kids in seats. And I really, and this is probably the most selfish I'll get over this, and it is very self-interested. It was wholly interrupting to have my kids' teacher have to call me and tell me my kid's got to stay home for the next 10 days, and I have to rearrange my whole schedule. It's selfish, but I'm not cut out to be a stay-at-home project attorney. It just does not work that way. And my husband's a contractor, and he can't be a stay-at-home contractor for 10 days. And it's disruptive, more importantly, in the classroom. So I think whatever wisdom we gained from last year, we made it through and kept our buildings open as long as we could and started on time and ended on time and had students in the classroom. And I'd like to just try to use that as a guiding principle for whatever we do here, is just keep plugging ahead. So.
Thank you. I wished I had invested in Sun Butter 20 years ago. I'd be retired now. So go ahead, Amber.
I have a couple comments and then a question. I do think consistency is better than not in how we start the school year. The flip-flopping is going to be very disruptive. I too, like Shannon, I have the luxury of being able to stay home and being more flexible with my schedule, but it is highly disruptive, not only to the kids, but to families who also maybe don't have that privilege and need to work or care for others, especially related to elementary school children who can't really look after themselves. I think there's some compromise here in terms of recommendation versus indoors and outdoors and some of our activities that I would like to see the Smart Restart Committee really focus on. I believe that if we are, we have a little bit of time before school starts. I think that if we are making decisions the Monday before or the Monday of weeks of the school year starting, I think that is also very disruptive. I think we need to give a little bit more lead time. And so whatever our sort of final decision to start the school year with, I think either needs to be made today or at a special Monday meeting next week, because I think the Monday of school starting is just too little of time for communication. I think if the board wishes to make a recommendation today, then that recommendation should start now. That we should be communicating to our faculty, our staff, and our families, because that will at least give us a little bit of data on if we did recommend it, even if it was for a week, are people are more people participating? And if they're not, do we need to strengthen language based on our belief of the policy or whatnot? One of the questions I had, because it was stated a couple times, and I think I lean on trusting the public health experts in the room, there was a statement made that there's evidence that masks reduce CO2 levels. Is there any truth to that? Could someone speak to that? Or raise CO2 levels or whatever, but basically like mass deplete oxygen.
I think I want to just mention that, I am not a physician. I'm an epidemiologist, and I would feel more comfortable deferring to a physician, and if I could talk, maybe Dr. Lund there. But from what I understand and the evidence I've seen, there has not been any reports, case studies, larger studies on hypoxia in individuals wearing masks for a long period of time. And I think we can look to our healthcare professionals who spent long shifts in N95s and things like that without any known ill effects from that, other than pressure sores on the bridge of their nose most days. So, but I don't think I'm the best expert to speak to that.
You can find research out there that suggests that there is CO2 retention, but when you look at the studies, I don't think they were designed very well. So, and to Sean's comment, I mean, those of us that work in healthcare have been masked for 10 hours plus a day for 17 months now. I have to rub my face really hard on the way to school board, so it gets the lines out. So, but I mean, and Shannon hinted that I said it last time. You can find data on either side. You can. So, Melissa, any official comments from GFEA or personal comments from you?
We haven't put out any type of official survey at this point, but from the feedback that I get, it is very split. Some teachers want it required, and many teachers have reached out and said, I don't want to be in a mask this year. It was very hard. So I think it's very much split, just like with everything else.
And Oh, Bill, go ahead.
I guess my question is why I talked about recommending and not requiring is that these kids are going to be wearing masks in school, but as soon as they leave school, they will not be in masks because there's not a county mask mandate right now in place. They're going to be in the basement with their 5 or 6 friends without masks, or they're going to be at gymnastics practice, or they're going to be at hockey practice, or baseball practice, or whatnot. And that's why I'm opposed until the county health doctor deems it fit that we go to a mask mandate throughout the county.
Thank you. I too want to, go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, I mean, I think to touch on that, the distinction I see, Bill, with that is that, you know, that's a choice to allow your family to congregate or maybe participate in certain sports, and you're choosing to elect to do that activity, whereas school is school, education is fundamental and, you know, a requirement of all parents to have their kids in a educational setting of some sort, right? Or we call it abuse and neglect, right? Truancy. And so it isn't so much, an elected choice to have your kid in a classroom with other kids. So that's just the distinction I see. I'm probably more of a CO2 expert than most because my work is in carbon capture, and I understand CO2 molecules, maybe not expelled from the lungs, but one thing is fundamental: CO2 is CO2. It's the same size and weight regardless of where it comes from. And when we have people spouting that, aerosols can make it through a mask, aerosols are larger than CO2 molecules. So if you believe that aerosols can make it through a mask, then you must believe that CO2 can also make it through a mask. They are different sizes and CO2 is smaller. And so the studies, I have to believe, are flawed in some way because, then those masks that are causing hypoxia must block aerosols too. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And so that's just the comment I wanted to make on CO2.
I just wanted to reiterate what Dr. Brenner said, and I want to thank all the public who came and spoke about this issue. It's obviously a passionate issue, and there are good people on both sides of this issue, and there's science on both sides of this issue. And I really appreciate the respect that you all showed tonight. That hasn't always happened. I've had more than one person threaten my life over this. We as a school board have been called monkeys. We as a school board have been called Nazis. I don't think there's any room for that in this public discourse. So I really appreciate everybody's comments, the passion. I think it showed what citizens can do. And so I do really appreciate that. Any final questions, comments? Go ahead, Jackie. And then at some point, we need a motion of something.
I want to come at this at a little bit of a different angle that also concerns me, and that is the liability that we hold as a district. From an ADA perspective and protection standpoint, liability in terms of if I have a student in my classroom, we're allowing people to make choices on whether they are masked or not. My child gets sick, is hospitalized, I have an extensive ICU bill, or my kid dies. How much is the district liable when something as simple as a mask could have made us less liable? That's a concern of mine. As well as ADA compliance. We don't allow peanuts in the school because of one student that may have an allergy to a peanut. If we have a student who has asthma, who has an underlying health condition, whether that be diabetes, an immunodeficiency, whatever that might be, if we're not providing an avenue for them to have education in a different way, then we must provide education in person. And so they are also having a right to have their health protected in any way possible and any way their doctors advise them of. I certainly, even from a funding perspective, we certainly could do the ADA route and go to students, right, who have underlying health conditions, but I believe that will be a lot of students, and I believe that will be a great cost to this district if we were to institute that when we can barely hold up with special ed as it is.
as far as the litigation question, I think we could be in court either way. So that'll be my remark on that piece. We made accommodations for students last year if they had underlying health conditions, and masks were not an option. We made accommodations. And we made sure that worked for them, whether it was a face shield or a different type of mask. We had several situations like that. So we've worked with families through each of those situations. The only other thing that I would say is you as a board legally are protected to make a decision if you wanted to say masks required. I think there's some suggestions out there that you don't have the authority to do that. We do have a legal opine that indicates you do.
And let's not forget our experience last summer, and I can't remember who said it, maybe Shannon, but none of this last summer was written in granite. It was written in limestone, and I think we haven't talked about that. It's possible that in 4 weeks COVID is 10 times worse than it is now, or it's possible in 4 weeks or 8 weeks that it's almost non-existent. So I think we're going to have to have the ability to be mobile and make decisions as conditions change, because I can guarantee you it's going to change. So the board, the superintendent, or the district recommendation is to recommend masks, and the other mitigation proposals. What would the board like to do?
I would make a motion that we accept the district's recommendation.
Do we have a second? Bill seconds. Further discussion? Go ahead, Amber.
Chris, would you accept an amendment to your motion that the recommendation will be effective as of Wednesday at 8 a.m.? I believe if the recommendation comes from the data that we have now, then we should be instituting that recommendation as soon as possible. And the reason why I didn't suggest tomorrow is because I think it would be fair to give a day to outwardly and inwardly communicate that to staff, teachers, families.
Are you making that as a formal amendment?
Yes.
Do we have a second to that? Go ahead, Shannon. Thank you. Discussion on just the amendment. Do we want to discuss the initial motion before we vote any, or we have to do that, don't we? Yeah. Okay, no other discussion. So the motion is if the initial motion to recommend mass pass, that it would be instituted at 8 a.m. on Wednesday, August, whatever it is, 11th. We may still be here meeting. Assuming roll call vote, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, roll call.
Carpenter? No. Douthit?
Yes.
Flynn?
Yes.
Hassett? No. Manley is absent. Mikula? Yes. Palmasino? Yes. Pardon me?
Yes.
Shab?
No.
Lunn?
Yes.
5 yes, 3 no, 1 absent.
Thank you, Cindy. So back to the original motion, further discussion. Go ahead, Shannon.
I'm good with making it a recommendation, but for the next meeting, can we make sure that we're very clear on quarantining and at least what the districts, because I know you read that out of policy, but it sounded like to me we need to huddle and make sure we're all confident and comfortable with that, because that's gonna, and then I would like it to just come back so we can affirm it based upon all of the approach being clear, if that works.
Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Briefly, the reason that I made the motion is observing what the district has done since March of 2019 and the steps that they've taken to this point. It seems they've been very wise, very methodical, very thorough, and I would anticipate the same as it's been said. This motion, this action will certainly be made. However, I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary based upon the data that's provided to us by the state, the feds, as well as, and most importantly, in my opinion, the county. So that's why I'm certainly in support of this, knowing full well change can occur.
Thank you, but you give the district a little too much credit because they started 9 months before the pandemic started, so. Other questions? Cynthia?
My question is, are we set to have a discussion about this then? Should this motion pass that masks would remain recommended, will we have it at the next meeting on the 16th, an opportunity to change that? Because I think based on even your conversation and dialogue that you had about Arkansas, they saw that within a week, I think you said, a spike within a week?
A month. It was about a month.
Well, okay, so, but if the spike is occurring, are we going to have, so my simple question is, are we having it on the agenda to talk about at the 16th?
I would concur and would agree that when we finish up with the city council, we move right into this conversation.
Dr. Brennan, could you talk a little bit about the Smart Restart Committee and how often it meets and how nimble or not nimble it can be, just because I think that's the day-to-day governing body that really helps us, that has public health representation on it.
The Smart Restart Committee meets every Thursday. Last year it was every Wednesday, but this year it's every Thursday at 1:30. Consists of at least 3, sometimes 4 public health representatives. It has most of our directors. All of our principal groups are represented. So it's a pretty good breadth of folks. And when I say all of our directors, that's child nutrition, because any decision that we make regarding spacing or distancing, that affects our lunchrooms, our cafeterias, if we're going to use alternative spaces, et cetera. So it's a pretty rich conversation for an hour each week. And on top of that, Ms. Galach is part of institutional partners meeting once a week as well. So she's interfaced with UND and other community members. Gina Wheeler, who is our safety and health manager, is part of a weekly meeting as well, interfacing with some of the same agencies, some different agencies. So the conversation really is in front of us at least 3 times a week with different agencies in the school district. And on top of that, Cabinet has these conversations ongoing. It's on our agenda every week, and hallway conversations and pop-up meetings. We had last year what we called 5-minute stand-ups, and those were hour-and-a-half stand-ups. And those were almost every other day, I would say. So lots of conversation, Dr. Lund.
Thank you. Amber?
I was just going to say, in anticipation of coming back at a next meeting with some more identified like quarantine guidelines and things like that, I think it would also help to have a visitor policy at least started. So for instance, like an outside organization, I know Safe Kids is really involved. If we believe that our measures are working, social distancing, hygiene, masking, can we allow those groups to come in? Will specials, the music rooms be able to be utilized? So again, I know that's getting into the details and things like that, but I do believe that there can be a compromise. If we believe that our mitigation strategies are working, then how can we make the education experience seem as normal as possible?
Further questions or comments? Go ahead, Bill.
But they're recommending to wear a mask. Are we creating, Dr. Brenner, a lot of phone calls to the district of what does this mean without putting not required? Or
Well, based on the agenda that went out last Thursday, that also went to the media.
yeah, and they didn't understand it at all.
Right. I mean, I think the interpretation of many people was the district is mandating masks. And I think that's why we saw some people here this evening thinking it was a mandate. So if the board feels there needs to be more clarity behind that recommended, we'd leave that up to you as a recommendation and would wordsmith that.
I'd like to make that amendment that if we add it after recommended, that it's not required, so people understand if they feel that would alleviate a couple hundred phone calls coming towards the district of what this really means.
We have a motion for an amendment. Do we have a second? Second by Doug. Further discussion about the amendment? Go ahead, Shannon.
I think you might avoid some phone calls. I think you're gonna still get a boatload of phone calls, so if that's the only reason for doing it. I mean, I suppose, you know, the 16th is coming up here pretty quick, so I don't know. That's just my thought on it.
Other questions, comments? So the motion is to add, what was it? Not required? But not required. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? No. Okay, roll call.
Douthit,
Yes.
Flynn. No. Hassett. No. Manley is absent. Mikula. Yeah. Palmasino. Shab.
This is just to change the amendment to the motion. Yes.
Carpenter. Yes. Lund.
No.
5 yes, 3 no, 1 absent.
Now we're back to the original motion again. And I would just make a plea for all the parents and guardians of kids that are in the Grand Forks Public Schools. Even if it's recommended, I would have a supply of masks available because it could be mandated by the 23rd or September or October, or we could all have a burning party in October when it's all over. We just don't know. I just think people, we all, that's our lives as parents, is making sure we're ready for our kids. That's why we have car seats. That's why we have bike helmets. May as well be ready. So, Shannon, you had a comment? Sorry. Go ahead, Jackie.
Is this motion that we just passed applicable to only students, or is this for staff and teachers as well?
It's everyone.
I am totally confused. I'm embarrassed. So did we just vote this in? No, we still just did the amendment.
We voted to add 3 words to it.
Okay, all right.
And I think a comma or two. I'm not a grammar person, you are, so I'll leave that up to you. Go ahead, Shannon. Oh, just one comma. So the motion is to, go ahead, Amber.
Part of the reason why I wore my mask tonight is as I recognize that this was on the agenda and it was recommended, I think as policymakers, we have a, when we make policy, we can help set norms as well. And so I chose to wear my mask knowing that if we did decide to move forward with a recommendation that we're helping to create a norm. So again, it would be a recommendation, but if it does pass, I would encourage fellow board members and district staff to be present at meetings with masks on and in the facilities, as I think we have a duty to set the norm and create that expectation.
I was waiting for the vote. So the motion is to approve the administrative recommendations with the addition of but not required. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, roll call vote.
Flynn. Yes. Hassett. No. Manley is absent. Mikula. Yes. Palmasino. Yes. Shab. No. Carpenter. Yes. Douthit.
Yes.
Lund.
Yes.
6 yes, 2 no, 1 absent.
We will be talking about COVID for the rest of the school year, I can guarantee you. So thank you all. That was a very good discussion. I do want to take a break, but I want to do it after we we let All True Health System come in, who have been waiting for an hour and a half. So if we could move on to item 7B, which is Grand Forks Public Schools and All True Health System Partnership Agreement. We'll let our colleagues get in here, and then Dr. Brenner, for you to take it over. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all for hanging out all night with us. So we are not going to go on a break till after we're done with you guys. So thank you for the four of you. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brenner to start off. And then if and when you speak, if you could come to the mic and just turn on the mic. Thank you all. Megan, good to see you.
Can Evan go? He looks like he wants to go.
Evan, just before we get started, if you have to go, you feel free. If you want to stay, feel straight. But if
I'll
you
stay for about 15 more minutes, but then I got to get to bed because I have football practice in about 9 hours.
Okay, I will go with you.
I know Coach Lennon, I'll allow you to be late. If you need it, you got it, all right?
All right, moving on to what I would call a really positive development in our community on page 15 of your packet. With us tonight, we have Christy Hall-Duran and Megan Compton representing All True. Thank you, ladies, for 2.5 hours of waiting. We appreciate that very much. We have Laura Cobb and Dick Olson from our legal team as well, and Mark Rarick, our athletic director, is with us as well. So thank you very much for your patience. This is really an exciting time. One of the things that I wanted to do as a new superintendent 3 years ago, and had the board institute a policy early on in my tenure with all of you, was to look at non-traditional revenue for a school district, knowing that we were going to have some budgetary challenges moving forward. So this type of agreement falls under non-traditional revenue, but more importantly, it just really highlights the collaboration and partnership that the school district and All True have entered into. So basically what you have in front of you tonight is a 10-year, $750,000 or $750,000 partnership with All True and the Grand Forks Public School District. This partnership will speak to $20,000 a year of contributions to both of our high schools for equipment, and the contributions of athletic trainers at both of our high schools and our middle schools. And it also includes a $35,000 a year contribution to the redevelopment and repurposement and refurbishment of Cushman Field, track and field, I should say. So basically there are two agreements there. One is the All True sponsorship agreement, that's the donation, and the second one is the All True Sports Medicine Services Agreement. There were lots of meetings between district and All True representatives. Not all of the All True people who were at the table with us having conversations are here tonight, but certainly representation is here. We wanted to make sure that the agreement was palatable for both the school district and for All True. So our legal team, All True's legal team, went back and forth. There was a little bit of wordsmithing, but by and large, it really felt like a collaborative effort. It didn't feel like two legal teams going at each other at all. So that's how I would frame it this evening. And any questions about the contract or the arrangements or what it means for athletics, Mark can respond to that. But as far as the agreement, I would defer to the experts sitting behind the table over there. So I will allow board members to ask questions if you do.
Questions or comments from board members? Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm enthused and excited about what's being taken place, the donation, the visibility. Altru's been longstanding in this community, and for Dr. Brenner to see one of his goals when he first was brought on board as superintendent to come to fruition is to be applauded, and what you're going to be doing for student athletes and for the schools. And I will quite honestly, Mr. Rarick, I think you'll agree with me, the Cushman need is going to be greatly appreciated by the district. So thank you for everything you've done to put this forward. It's an awesome achievement. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Go ahead, Jackie.
I'm excited to have experts with our athletes because not only are they going to have some care there directly, but also I think students will learn early how to take care of themselves and to take care of their bodies as physical people in sports. And so I'm really excited about that, having a student myself who's all of a sudden a sports person all of a sudden. So yeah, I'm really excited about this.
Go ahead, Bill, and then Cynthia.
Yeah, maybe Mark could answer this on the Cushman, $35,000 per year to a Cushman athletic complex. What are we thinking? Because we own the football field and the bleachers, but we don't own the building.
Yeah, my understanding is the sponsorship dollars that are included that are simply for track and turf replacement costs, not for building.
It's not with the Park District, Bill. Go ahead, Cynthia.
You've had athletic trainers in the past with the Grand Forks Public Schools, so could you just talk a little bit about the shift? And full disclosure, my son is an athletic trainer, and he's underappreciated, so I certainly appreciate athletic trainers.
Yeah, sponsorship dollars aside, we've had a partnership with Altru for 15-ish years. The change in this is monetarily. There's the sponsorship dollars with that, and then the amount of coverage provided to Grand Forks Public Schools about doubles. We'll be moving from 1 AT per high school to 2, and we'll be moving from 1 AT for our 4 middles to 2. So we'll have expanded coverage really across all of our buildings.
So that's one thing I really applaud, because it's the athletic trainer who really recognizes when an athlete needs the support. So thank you so much to Altru.
Other comments or questions? Go ahead, Amber.
I do not know how this feeds into any potential career and technical education conversations, but I imagine that there's, under the healthcare careers aspect of career and tech ed, that there is an athletic trainer component. And so maybe not. But I'm wondering if this partnership or how this could potentially enhance that, if there's a teaching and learning component with the athletic trainers that would help educate those students or whatnot. I know Mr. Ripley's not here.
No, that's okay. I can start. Catherine just stepped out of the room, but what I can say is with our partnership, there are a number of other pieces that we've talked about, from school nurses to, I think there are 4 or 5 different pieces. So we haven't specifically talked about athletic training as a track with CTE, but certainly medical careers is one of our most popular CTE courses, and the ability to expand. And I already said the school nursing component. I think we're talking about bringing in 3 nurses from Altru. Ms. Compton, thank you.
Now, can you hear me okay? Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Brenner. So as he mentioned, as it relates specifically to this agreement, we wanted to have a conversation and make sure that we're clear about what's connected to the sponsorship dollars. But we've been working with Catherine and other partners in the school system to talk about how we can better support them through both, as you're talking about career opportunities, even time with our athletic trainers. And as you mentioned, they often are the first ones to see signs in whether it's physical or mental health with students. So to support them, but then also be available for a variety of different career path opportunities. But in addition to that, we're having conversations about how do we allow kids to be introduced into the healthcare fields earlier. So as Terry mentioned, part of that comes with the school nurses. in a partnership and collaboration where we have nursing shortages, the school system may have nursing shortages. How do we partner together to allow a school nurse to be somebody that can be used by both? Because there is so much collaboration and crossover there anyway. So in addition to that, we're working with Catherine and others to talk about how do we support them and bringing students, whether it's into our environment or providing opportunities for them to be exposed to it. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those no-brainer win-win situations, and Altru has been around and been doing for over 100 years, supporting the communities that they're in, and most people don't understand the educational component that Altru has had, just not only with medical students and residents, but all sorts of students. I mean, at any point in time, we have had 200 or 300 students in the buildings of Altru Health System at one time. So I think this is just strengthening those bonds, and you get the students that are in the medical careers. I don't know why they couldn't follow an EMT around, or they couldn't do. I mean, the imagination is limitless as to how we can do this. So I think this is a great partnership, and I think we deserve to appreciate Altru for what they've done for this community, but also done for this school district throughout the years, and it'll only get stronger with this partnership. Other questions or comments? Jackie.
I think sponsorships and community partnerships are amazing, and our time of financial need is sort of, this is great that we're looking at these sorts of pieces. I know some people will likely have a concern about money and medical advice being intertwined, right? And so just for maybe a public kind of perception piece, I would assume that any kind of referrals or recommendations from a medical point of view would not be necessarily directed only to Altru, but that your people would have a solid understanding of all available resources in the community. So it's kind of a question.
Yeah, so the way that we would set it up is, I'll use it as an example. If we have an athletic trainer who believes that somebody needs to be referred for a higher level of care or needs to be seen by a professional outside of what they're offering, it wouldn't be a specific recommendation to a particular pediatrician, as an example, but you should follow up with a pediatrician, or you should follow up with a physical therapist, you should follow up with an orthopedic sports medicine provider, not necessarily specific to one place or another.
And I can tell you in practice, because they've had athletic trainers at the school district since, I think it was 2004, 2005. In practice, that's how they do it. They'll say, gee, you've got this fracture, you've got this, you need to see either your primary or you need to go to an orthopedist. And it's not like, well, you should go to this guy or that girl or something like that, because that's a decision the family and the student really need to make. So the recommendation is to approve. Do we have to approve both separately? Yes. Okay.
Make a motion to accept the donation agreement.
Okay. Do we have a second? Second by Shannon. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
So I'll make a recommendation to accept the sport, or I thought it was the advertising one, but is it the sports medicine services agreement?
Yes. So we have a motion to accept that. Do we have a second? Second by Bill. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Well, you had to wait 3.5 hours for 15 minutes, but thank you all. And I'm going to do the president's prerogative, and we have a 5-minute recess to do the rest of our business. So we'll be back at 9:32. warning, just so everybody is aware. And I know the bathrooms are tornado shelter. So let's go back to recommendations for action. 7C, the Finance Committee report. Amber. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped. Thank you for not catching me before I did the all true one. So let's go back to the consent agenda. Do we have a motion and a
I'll
second? Motion by Shannon. Do we have a second on the consent agenda?
Second.
Second by Chris. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you guys for helping me there. Let's move on to 7C, which is the Finance Committee report. Amber.
Do you want me to give an overview or handle each of these separately, or how would you like me to?
Well, I think we need approval on all three of them, right? So maybe do one at a time. Is that okay with the group? Okay.
Okay. First one, I'll let Scott take that one. We reviewed some categories in the ESSER 3 application and had a discussion about each of those individual area or programmatic needs. We asked a few questions, got some really great responses. The district had a very good handle, in our opinion, of what those dollars would be used for. So, Scott, if you have anything to add on that.
It's on page 33 of your electronic packet for those of you.
Sure. I can hit the highlights real briefly here, I guess. For Grand Forks Public Schools has been allocated ESSER 3 funds totaling just under $18.5 million. It's not a paper application. It's actually an online application with the North Dakota Web Grant System. So upon board approval, that will get input into the North Dakota Web Grants system. And that must be submitted by August 17th. Funds will be received on a reimbursement basis for allowable expenditures incurred between March 13th of 2020 and September 30th of 2024. One thing I didn't include in the memorandum is that ESSER 3 has a requirement that a minimum of 20% of the funds must be spent to address learning loss. And so with about $18.5 million, 20% of that would be about $3.7 million. As you can see in the summary, the recommendation is for about $9.25 million to go to address learning loss. Beyond that, facilities, mental health. I'll talk very briefly about the legislature item on there. And I've got in parentheses $143 per pupil. And so during the legislative session, there was a lot of going back and forth on a dollar amount for the state to withhold for the per pupil payment for the state to upgrade some of their software systems related to the education. And where the legislature landed on was $143 per pupil. So we're in that $7,400 to $7,500 range. Which you can see would equate to nearly $1.1 million. I'm on a legislative subcommittee and related to education, and we had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and one of the legislators was on asking business managers, superintendents, et cetera, how to pull that funding back, and likely what's going to happen at some point, potentially half of that in each of the next 2 years will be withheld from one of the monthly state per pupil payments. And so that legislator recommended building in a line item for ESSER 3 to offset that. Otherwise, if we don't set aside some funds for that, we will in effect lose over $1 million from our per pupil payment. And so that's what's built in here. There's it impacts every school district, and there were some comments that a lot of school districts don't even know this is happening, et cetera. So I'm not going to get on the political aspect of it, but fully knowing that this is going to happen, I'd recommended to administration and at the finance committee meeting that we build that into our ESSER 3 so that we're not going to be short $1 million over the next 2 years. Within learning loss, et cetera, Dr. Brenda Lewis and Catherine Glatch and Dr. Brenner and others, there was a lot of work with school principals and other internal stakeholders on some of those allocations. Within facilities, again, about $6 million. That would be over between now and potentially September 30th of 2024. So, the $18.5 million is not going to be all spent and reimbursed within this next year. It'll be over the course of between now and September of 2024. Along with this, there's going to be some state reporting requirements, data submissions, to show how our student achievement and other various metrics are improving and whatnot. So as we move forward, if we're not seeing some direct correlation with some of the offerings, say within learning loss, we within a subset of that, we might do something different with some of those funds to course correct and make sure we're hitting the goals that we need to achieve.
Questions for Scott or Amber about the ESSER 3 application? Go ahead, Cynthia.
Question is, what does mental health really encompass?
There's a variety of areas within that we'd be looking at. One of part of that really was even with Ultra here tonight was some help with talking about some work with some nursing type things. Even beyond our physical therapy, some nursing school psychologists, some social work dollars for social work. Jeff Gockler has been here talking about sources of strength in the past. A variety of, just a variety of items.
Programmatic resources as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to just publicly say, I think art is one of the really helpful pieces to mental health. And as you recall, the board eliminated the Artist in the Classroom. That's a program that affected K through 5, all children got art. And so I would really ask the district to consider mental health and art programming as part of that. I just think, to me, that's part of mental health. And the Mentor Center tonight highlighted the art that's being done there as part of mental health, and that's a very small, small component of what they're doing, but just something to think about moving forward. Because I think these funds are rather flexible in how you allocate within the categories. And you can argue art helps mental health.
Other questions or comments? Shannon, go ahead.
No, I think Cynthia raises a question that I didn't realize where those particular decisions had played out. So, what is the approach, or can we, and I'll certainly bring this up for other items that the board is curious about, but there was a lot of talk of discontinuing Artist in the Classroom. That certainly was on the budget cuts, and then we stepped back from those particular RIFs that would impact that program specifically. But I don't know that it was ever chased down from how are we phasing this out, or is it ended completely at this time? I know there was talk of teachers taking that role on, but I would appreciate kind of now that the dust has settled from that, what is the aftermath look like?
Yeah, we have retained Mary Koulis in her Artist in Classroom coordinator role. She's assigned to Amy Barch's department, Curriculum, Instruction, and Technology. She's still going to work out of
Probably.
Sirens must be going off in the community.
He told me time to move. Really? Yes. I'm gonna just go to
I think we'll have to suspend the meeting for now. I'm not sure driving from here is a good idea right now with the sirens going off. We probably should go to an internal place.
So for our guests who are here, you're welcome to join us in the bathrooms.
We'll just take up the rest later. Are you okay with budget okay like this?
I'd move approval of the preliminary budget and tax levy for fiscal year 2021, 2022.
Second.
Any discussion? Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. And then do we need to do the consolidated grants tonight?
That would help.
Okay. Do we have a we have a motion? We have a motion by Bill and a second by Shanna to approve the grant funding. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Are we not taking action on superintendent?
Well, yeah, and let's just finish that off. Do we have to have an approval of the same contract? Is that what we need?
I would move approval of the superintendent's 2021, 2022 contract.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please say aye.
I'll just.
Aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
So aye, it's fine.
Shannon, do you have to drive?
Yeah.
Be careful.
Well, that's the way to get it done.